Extras, side stories, 239 Extra 1 The beginning of summer. The spring of that year had been a very hard time. Although the air was warm, the ground beneath their feet was soaked with blood, and the farmers, who should have been tilling their fields, were forced to wield spears instead of plows. It was a time of calamities brought on by the oldest dragon. However, even though the land was stained with blood, nature continued to bloom, and now, after a year had passed, summer was approaching. This place hasn't changed at all. The western city of Trinova. A person was walking through the mansion, their voice resonating through the air. The girl, clad in a large cloak she seemed to have picked up somewhere, let it billow behind her as she walked. Her hair was green, the color of summer. Has it been 3 years? The girl's height had grown significantly since she left, and she raised her gaze. But unlike her, the mansion's landscape remained unchanged, momentarily turning Charlotte back into the child she had been when she left. In the garden visible in the distance, her mother was tending to the plants. If she turned the corner ahead, there would be the training grounds where her brothers practiced. And if she walked along the path she was currently on, she would reach the Ravnoma Hall where her father had always been. Remove it? Yes, where her father, the ruler of these lands, used to sit. However, what now adorned the entrance to the hall was the faded emblem of Gadar, Creek. The door to the mansion opened behind the flag that the soldiers quickly removed. The inside was completely dark, contrasting with the bright summer outside, and it was filled with dust and the foul stench of death. So you've finally arrived, brat. Sitting in the spot where her father had once sat was an unfamiliar man. The corners of his mouth, where even the noonday sun couldn't bear to shine, were drenched in dark red blood that flowed ceaselessly. Sigmund Gadar, the enemy of her father and her family. And Sigmund Gadar, who would become the final loser of the continental war waged by the oldest dragon. As Charlotte looked at him, there was a coldness in her eyes that seemed beyond her young age. Is my son dead? Not yet. That boy never listens to me. A long sigh escaped his deeply bent figure. With his back hunched over, he let out a heavy, deep sigh, like the last breath of life in the twilight of his existence. I told him he wouldn't die well and that he should take his own life. Stephen's whereabouts have already been secured by Nidavalier Sigmund. Charlotte Ravnoma walked along the long carpet and ascended the steps of the hall, steps that only the ruler could climb. Before she knew it, she held a sword with a black blade in her hand. So now it's just you left. For Gadar, the girl who had become the last of the Ravnomas might have been the last remaining obstacle. The tip of the sword extended abruptly, stopping at the back of Sigmund's neck, harshly connecting their worlds. A cowardly traitor who deceived my father, cough cough, and a coward who refuses to pay the proper price until the very end. The usurper of the West, who had bathed Charlotte's mansion in blood with his treacherous ambush, now refused to accept his final defeat, swallowing poison. Charlotte frowned as she watched Sigmund. Any last words? But even so, Charlotte sought to fulfill her duty as the victor. The cold, gleaming tip of the sword trembled as if it wanted to pierce Sigmund right then, but she still attempted to uphold her duty because she wanted to show that she and he were different. He swallowed poison to avoid dying in servitude, but in the end he was cast aside by the victor in his final moments. At that moment, Sigmund was thinking of one man. The knight from that day who hid the frightened dwarves behind his towering presence. Jorge. He had been confident that he would win, but in the end he became the loser and lost everything. When had it all started? Was it when his soldiers failed to cross Dermer, or when they burned the Ravnoma flag? In the end, you stabbed me in the back. No, it probably began when I met a boy named Vlad. From the moment I met the Knight of the North, born in the cold alleyways, you rose with the sword. A blue sword raced toward Sigmund's head as he spat his final words filled with regret. The name of the sword now rushing toward me is Charlotte Ravnoma. The name of the knight who brought this sword here is Vlad Oreo, and the one who raised the sword was Jorge, a knight of the courtesans who preferred mercy over duty. Swoosh. From sword to sword, from world to world. The girl's sword was bringing an end to a long and painful war, with Sigmund's head tumbling down the stairs, spring after winter, and now the beginning of a new summer. Oh Lord, this never ends, no matter how many times I pull them. The scene was of a small rural village filled with vast fields of green wheat and rows of cottages behind them. It was a peaceful place with only the sound of cows mooing in the distance, but it was also filled with the grumbling of someone who didn't quite belong. Will this ever be done? The summer wheat fields, not yet ripe, were still green. However, the blonde hair peeking out from above had the color of ripe wheat. You idiot, if you used your hands instead of talking, this would have been done ages ago. Why is it over already? There's still a lot left. A man without armor but with a sword sheath strapped to his back, as if unable to part from his blade. Aside from that, Vlad, dressed like an ordinary farmer, lifted his head and began to look around the wide wheat field. No, I heard you're supposed to use people for work like this. If you use people, it costs money. You've made plenty of money. I know I got a big share this time too. Beside Vlad, who continued to grumble, was Ramond with a straw hat pulled low over his head. He looked the part as if he had been a farmer since birth, but until last year he had been a ruthless man, constantly eliminating enemies at the front of Dermer. If you spend blindly what you've earned, you can't avoid becoming a beggar. Anyway, today's youth don't know the virtue of thrift. Seeing Ramond click his tongue as he said those words, Vlad started frowning as if he had had enough. Save what you save and your old body starts to wither. You're so noisy. Anyway, keep your mouth shut before someone calls me a city type. Ramond yelled as if he couldn't take it any longer. However, as if what Vlad said was true, the sun was slowly setting behind him. Even though I was born in the city, I know that days in the countryside are short, right? Ramond's estate was bathed in the red light of the setting sun as it slowly sank behind the horizon. Vlad, standing beneath it, grinned contentedly as the surroundings grew darker and darker. So let's stop pulling weeds and go have dinner. Yes, it was my mistake asking a guy like you to help with farming. It was probably natural to ask this of a city man who had never worked in agriculture. In the end, it was a day that ended without finishing the planned routine, only accepting Vlad's complaints. Let's go, even though I couldn't pay you with bread, I'll at least give you some soup. Haha. The food here is so delicious. However, Ramond didn't particularly regret having let Vlad handle the plow, because Vlad's expression looked a bit relaxed as he set down his sword for a moment. How old are you? 4 years old. But why are you showing 5 fingers? Underneath a table full of food, a young girl proudly stretched out her hands, showing 5 fingers. Are you turning 5 soon? No. It's been less than a month since I turned 4. Even though she gave the wrong answer, her chubby cheeks made anyone want to pinch them. Ramond took his youngest granddaughter, sat her on his lap and spoke. She's still young and can't fold her fingers the way she wants. Aha, her clenched fists looked as chubby as her cheeks. It was clear that she had been well fed and was growing strong. A small smile appeared on Vlad's face as he watched the child. Anyway, I'm glad the war ended quickly. Unlike last year, it seems like we can look forward to a good harvest this year. Before anyone realized, the table was filled with freshly baked white bread brought in by Ramond's daughters-in-law. It was the first time Vlad had tasted freshly baked white bread since meeting Father Andreas. I didn't expect the Golden Duke to surrender so quickly. They say he's a man who prioritizes losses and gains like a businessman rather than duty or honor. I suppose he quickly calculated that victory would be hard to achieve. The Continental War, which had started with the call to arms by Sarnas, the Dragonblood Duke, was now in its second year and the war itself was nearing its end. At the beginning of the war, the Central Army had such a strong momentum that it seemed as if they would devour the North. But now that momentum was fading like a dying fire. Of course, the impact of losing focus in the early stages of the war must have been significant, thanks to you. Well, maybe there was a reason for that. Various races had begun to rise up in different parts of the land, alongside the fierce resistance in the north. And though the forces of the empire, who had long been oppressed by the central nobles, had joined the resistance, the greatest variable was undoubtedly the duel between Vlad and Sarnas. But that's no longer important. A war that could have drowned the entire continent in blood had ended with minimal sacrifice, thanks to the man sitting across the table, who was now merely offering breadcrumbs to a dirt-covered little girl. At least this year there won't be many children going hungry, isn't that right? Yes, a hero of the continent praised by all, a new swordmaster of this era, a figure that emerged after the founding of the nation. But now he was just an ordinary-looking young man handing bread to a little girl. So, when do you plan on attending Rudiger's succession ceremony? If it were me, I would have wanted you to be there early. I have to go. Vlad, now eating his share of the bread, replied with a smile to Ramond. There's already plenty of people going to see it. What are you going to do? Should we go together? Ramond's mansion was situated right next to the city of Varna. Therefore, he was in a position to travel directly to Sturma, where the succession ceremony was to be held, but Vlad simply shook his head. I have to pass through Sora before going there. Why? Is there really a need to go? Sora was the southernmost city in the county of Vayezid. Ramond was puzzled by Vlad's words, but after hearing the final explanation, he had no choice but to nod. Every time I go somewhere, I have to say goodbye. I promised I would do it. Tusk, 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 you live such a tight life. From a cunning boy to a young man who now knew how to smile. That might have been possible because he had a home he created for himself, rather than the small home he had once been forced to abandon. But make sure you come before it's too late. If your name is worth it, it'll be easier to prepare if you arrive at least a month in advance. Understood. Vlad nodded at Ramond's words, lifted his head for a moment, and began to take in the current scene. Bread, steaming soup, and even a child smiling at him. These were peaceful sights that he would never have dared to dream of before, yet as his eyes absorbed the scene, Vlad couldn't shake the inexplicable feeling of lingering loneliness nestled deep in his heart. 240, Extra 2 Marble Game. One morning, while leaving Ramon's estate and heading towards Sora, despite it being summer, the cool air of the northern plains spread a light mist across the grasslands. What's going on? What's happening? Only in the northern plains could you feel such refreshing summer air. But Noir stood still, gazing quietly at the hill in front of him. What's happening? Seeing Noir frozen, Vlad narrowed his eyes, looking towards the distant hill. On a hill in the plains where a black horse and a blonde knight were staring together, a herd of wild horses, who had silently followed them, stood watching, rising like a wave of green. Aren't those your old friends? Snort. At Vlad's words, Noir, visibly uneasy, began pawing at the ground. Now he was known as the Black Horse Noir, but before Vlad had named him, he was a wild horse, a son of the plains. The surviving members of the herd from the time of the strongest dragon Deathworm were now roaming the Varna plains, watching their former leader. Do they want you to follow them? Hearing Vlad's words from behind, Noir lifted his head silently. Except for the herd of wild horses visible in the distance, it was just the two of them in the vast green sea. At that moment, Noir seemed to contemplate the world he had once belonged to, as if reminiscing. Jingle, jingle. Behind Vlad and Noir, who stood still, the sound of small bells echoed. Caravans laden with goods began to appear, moving through the morning mist that was slowly dissipating. Whoa, who goes there? The merchants, leading a long line of caravans, emerged. They were traders from a large trading company carrying dozens of wagons in a single convoy. We are from the Canner family. If you have no business here, kindly move aside. In the deserted plains, it was natural to be wary of strangers. Although things had changed now a few years ago, these merchants had suffered great losses due to the barbarians roaming the plains. Canner, huh? However, Vlad didn't respond to the sharp question from the merchants. He only looked silently at the familiar banner flying at the center of the caravan. I wonder if he's here. Vlad murmured to himself as he pulled out a small flag he had stowed behind his saddle. A small banner with a white background filled with various crests. Pointing to one of the crests, which seemed to have been carved a long time ago, Vlad smiled and spoke. Do you know Portly Canner? What? The merchants were surprised to suddenly hear the name of their employer's son. No, more precisely, they were startled to see the flag raised by the blonde knight. That guy was my companion back when I was a squire. Among the many crests engraved densely on the banner, the Canner family's crest was prominently placed, as if it had been one of the first to be carved. If he's here, tell him that Vlad from Sora is looking for him. Now, many families would vouch for his name, but just a few years ago, he had been a scrawny boy, thrilled by any sausage offered to him. The boy who could barely ride a horse was now calling out for his old friend by name. Wow, I didn't expect to find you here. A young man poked his head out of the carriage, beaming with a wide smile. He was well-fed, his round cheeks gleaming with fullness. Where have you been all this time? In Sturma or Varna? At Lord Ramon's estate. I went to learn a bit about farming. Portly's voice boomed loudly, echoing through the caravan. Though they were walking side by side, one riding the carriage, the other on horseback, Portly's voice, as loud as his joy, broke the stillness of the morning. Anyway, I've been wanting to see you, but… As they moved along, Portly's demeanor toward Vlad seemed somewhat reserved, despite both of them heading in the same direction. Come visit me, I'll be staying at the Inn of the Smiling Rose for a while. Vlad spoke first, understanding Portly's cautious attitude. It was true that there was now a huge gap between the swordmaster known across the continent and the son of a merchant family, something that couldn't be easily compared. However, Vlad acted as if nothing had changed from their days as squires, biting into a sausage as he responded. There are a lot of people wanting to see me, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it. I'll tell the innkeeper to let you in. Come whenever you want. Can I really? It seems you haven't changed much. Is someone still bothering you? Though their time together hadn't been long, they had helped each other with whatever they needed. Perhaps Vlad's remarkable growth from his days as a squire could be credited to the provisions given by the Canner family. And what's all this? Does Sora need so much meat? Oh, this. Vlad shifted the conversation, marveling at the long line of Canner's wagons. The caravan stretched so far that one had to crane their neck to see the end of it. Though the Canner Trading Company, which had conquered the Black Bear territory, was impressive, Sora wasn't large enough to require such an abundance of supplies. We're leaving half in Sora and the other half we're shipping west by boat. West? Yes, to the west, to be precise, to Nidavellir. Nidavellir, once the name of the Dwarf Liberation Front, now referred to a city instead of an organization. It had replaced the island of Lemnos, which was sunk by the mightiest dragon, and became a new home for the dwarves. I've heard a new dwarf city has risen near Trinova. But the dwarves sure love their alcohol and meat. That's true, the dwarves had found their roots and established themselves again. However, it would take time before the land, still filled with sand, returned to its former state. But I've heard that the dwarves are requesting a drink called Captain Q. I've never heard of it before. Do you know what it is? No. Though Vlad clearly remembered the name, a sticky dark brown drink, he pretended ignorance as the city walls appeared in the distance. There it is, Sora, from Sturma to Sora. At the end of the expansive northern plains, Vlad began to see his hometown. What's that? The boy's hometown, the city he had promised to return to. However, though the wall of the castle was familiar, the sight of the gate below was something he had never seen before. Hey, don't cut in line. I'm not cutting in. The gates of Sora were always crowded as it was the logistics hub of the north. I've been waiting here for 3 days. When can I get in? Is it true that Lord Vlad is here? But now, countless people were camped out, turning the gate into a bustling marketplace with no room to pass through. Why are there so many people? The war just ended, and what does that have to do with anything? What does it have to do with it? Portly shrugged, looking at Vlad with a puzzled expression. The knights, now without wars to fight, where do you think they'll go? Before heading home, they want to see the famous Swordmaster at least once. Golden coins were a reality, but the Swordmaster was a legend. A title every knight held in their heart had finally come to life in this era, so it was only natural that knights from across the continent flocked to Sora. What am I supposed to do? But the Swordmaster that everyone wanted to meet was simply overwhelmed by the horde of knights in front of him. At a glance, there were hundreds of knights gathered at the city gates. Not all of them had come just to shake his hand. So, have you become an emperor, a Swordmaster of this era, free from all allegiances? Yet the freedom he sought came with a price. The tall, wide church in the city of Sora, sued as a grand structure with only the distant city hall comparable in size. However, instead of the usual solemnity, it was filled with the sounds of children running about. Don't run in the hallways. Yes. In front of the bishop, dressed in a red robe, stood several children nervously fidgeting with their fingers. Just moments ago, they had been running as if the world were ending, but upon seeing the tall figure with cold, gray eyes, anyone would lower their head in submission. If you understand, go now. Yes, despite their agreement, the children resumed running almost immediately. As Pedro watched them, a vein throbbed helplessly on his forehead. Damn city! Pedro, the bishop of the city of Sora, was now the head of the Orthodox Church here, yet inwardly he was furious at the state the church had fallen into in just a few years. Bang, what a shock! Pedro, with long strides resembling those of an angry stork, stormed into his office. Inside, in his private space, an uninvited guest awaited him. What are you doing here? A man with striking red hair gleaming under the sunlight. However, the elegant armor beneath his uniquely colored hair clearly marked him as an Orthodox holy knight. I was waiting, Bishop. Waiting. More like wasting time, as always. Frustrated by the man's words, Pedro slumped heavily into his chair, running a hand through his hair as he sighed. Why are there so many children in the church lately? That's because you called them here, isn't it? Me. Pedro's gaze sharpened as he caught the mocking smile on Radu's face, but the man before him wasn't easily intimidated. A city that birthed a swordmaster and a bishop who outlawed pedophilia, where else would the war orphans wandering about go? I'd come here too. The world is a dangerous place. Terrible things happen if you sit idle. Perhaps, as Radu had just said, the northern city of Sora might indeed be the only refuge for war orphans who had lost their parents and were now wandering aimlessly. Besides, Madame Marcella even opened an orphanage, so this seems to be the right thing to do. Get out. Though Radu's words were not without reason, they were all the more infuriating because of it. Even now, knights and orphans continued to flock to Sora in droves. Pedro, whether he liked it or not, was the bishop of this city, responsible for managing the numerous incidents caused by these new arrivals. Should I leave? Yes, get out. I can't if I leave. Why? Despite the elderly bishop's outburst of rage, Radu responded only with a smile. If I leave, there will be dozens of knights challenging me to duels. If Vlad of Sora is not around, then the next in line is Radu of Dragulia. Although I've already discarded that surname. In any case, if I leave, the city's security will be in real jeopardy. Radu's words, spoken almost provocatively, weren't wrong from the start. I told you to leave. However, just because something is right doesn't mean it's always welcome. Pedro's anger finally boiled over, seeing Radu speaking only about himself during this busy time when the bishop had to deal with endless chaos. Take the children with you and get out too. Ah, the deep, booming voice of the old bishop echoed powerfully through the halls of the church, resonating even in his old age. Unlike the commotion at the city gates, there was an eerie silence in a back alley of Sora. In a small, hidden tunnel, a man poked his head out. This hole is even smaller now. It was a narrow opening in the city wall, known only to the children who roamed the alleyways. Standing in the shadow of the wall, Vlad straightened up, brushing the dirt off his body. Noir will know how to get in on his own. He had left Noir in the care of the Canner Company. The horse would enter the city with Portly. Being as intelligent as he was, Noir would find his way to the Inn of the Smiling Rose. Clap, clap, huh. Vlad had snuck into Sora to avoid the mass of knights gathered outside. Taking a moment to catch his breath while looking at the familiar scenery, he suddenly heard an unfamiliar sound. What's that? Though the scenery was familiar, the atmosphere in Sora's alleyways had completely changed. As he walked through the streets, now filled with sunlight rather than the darkness of old, Vlad stopped when he saw a group of children gathered ahead. Wow, this guy really is bad at this. How do you expect to win playing like that? Children in the back alleys gathered during the day, no longer at night. These were the same children who used to beg and steal on the streets, but now they were laughing, their hands filled with shiny marbles. Can we play one more round, please? Amidst the children, a beastman stood, wearing a worried expression. One more round of marbles, just one more. The man trying to convince the children while clutching his marbles was none other than Nibelun, the wizard. Seeing him in such a ridiculous situation, Vlad couldn't help but laugh. 241 Extra 3 The War of the Roses. 2. Vlad followed the familiar path toward the smile of the rose. However, despite being on his way home, there was a sense of discomfort in Vlad's expression. Try to make sure those kids don't follow us, he said. And how am I supposed to do that? Nibelun replied. Aren't you friends with them? Behind Vlad, the children from the alley were sticking to him like glue. Vlad sighed deeply, wanting to avoid the constant challenges from the children playing at being knights as he tried to return quietly to the smile of the rose. By the way, how old are you now to still be playing marbles with them? The children's eyes shone as brightly as the marbles in their hands. Unable to bring himself to dismiss those envious gazes, Vlad started expressing his frustration toward the calm Nibelun. If you wanted to play marbles, you should have done it with the kids from uptown. Do you know how cunning these alley kids are? Really? These were alley kids who had learned about the world far too early because no one was there to protect them. Given that he was dealing with children who thought everything was about survival, it was only natural that Nibelun's win rate was dismal. But I specifically wanted to play with these kids. Why? Still, the mystery-seeking wizard was eager to win the children's marbles, because the marbles these kids have are the brightest. Of all the marbles I've seen, the ones rolling around here are the most radiant. The eyes of the children, looking at the brightest star in the darkest place, embodied the mystery Nibelun was searching for. Either way, you're not going to win. You've already become an easy target. Then help me this time. Play marbles with me, please. This is absurd. A wizard pleading with the Swordmaster of this era to play marbles with him. After hearing that, Vlad laughed in disbelief and began to touch the rear wall of the building they had already reached. Have all the kids left? This is my territory now. The children who had been following Vlad closely stopped right at the entrance of the alley, not daring to cross. Perhaps it was an act of respect toward the deeply ingrained territorial rules of the alleys. Why are you pushing the wall? This isn't a wall. In the silent alley, Vlad began pushing hard against what seemed like a wall but was, in fact, a concealed backdoor. I guess no one's used this in a while. Only members of Jorge's gang knew about the secret entrance to the Smile of the Rose. It was a backdoor that had constantly been used when the back alleys were dark. However, the hidden hinges were now covered in rust, as if no one had used them since Godin's last visit. Creak, the secret door opened with difficulty, as if even one had forgotten it was a door at all. As the door opened, old dust fell onto Vlad's head, and what greeted him was a dark-skinned boy with wide, startled eyes. What? The first person to greet Vlad upon his return was Ned, who stood atop a large barrel holding a bottle of liquor. However, his surprised appearance was highly suspicious, as if he had been caught doing something he shouldn't have. Vlad, when did you get here? Though unspoken, it was a scene that was easily recognized. Because it was something Vlad himself had often done as a child. Make sure you replenish the liquor you took. I'll tell your brother if there's anything missing from that barrel. Wait. I can explain. You better refill it before Otter comes and beats you for what's missing. Ned hurriedly climbed down from the barrel as if he had finally realized the situation, but Vlad and Nibelun were already at the bottom of the stairs leading to the first-floor lobby. I told you only the smart ones can steal. Vlad, hold on a second. Vlad opened the door as if he couldn't even hear Ned's desperate cries from behind him. Suddenly, bright lights flickered in the corner of his eye. Vlad frowned for a moment at the glow of the chandelier hanging above him. Nothing's changed here. But soon, the corners of Vlad's eyes softened as he heard the familiar noise of the inn and the scent of food filled his nose. Though time had passed and people had changed, the smile of the rose still welcomed him. Finally back where he belonged, Vlad began to take familiar steps with a faint smile. Now the Smile of the Rose, which had once been a brothel, had transformed into the only luxury inn in the north. Vlad and Nibelun walked through the slightly altered halls of the place. This room is small, Nibelun remarked. It's large compared to the others, Vlad responded. Vlad had entered his room on the fourth floor, a modest space compared to the decorated halls they had walked through. He began to unpack his belongings there. Why is it so hidden? It seems like you're the only one who uses this floor, Nibelun asked. Back then I wasn't supposed to be found. The fourth-floor hallway, which only one customer could enter, was eerily quiet, unlike the bustling atmosphere below. I used to talk to myself. I had conversations with Kahano, Vlad explained. Oh, that's how it was. The atmosphere on the fourth floor seemed somewhat lonely. It was a larger space than needed, and since Vlad had no one to exchange words with anymore, it made the space feel even emptier. You're back already? Though Kahana was no longer there, someone was still waiting for Vlad in that place. Zemina, this time you returned quite quickly. A red-haired woman rested her arm on the banister, quietly observing Vlad. Zemina, wearing a dress as striking as her appearance, stared intently at Vlad. Well, considering how in the past you'd be gone for over a year to end a war, 6 months is a decent time. However, despite Zemina's beauty, her eyes held the sharp thorns of a rose, piercing and direct, difficult for even Vlad to ignore. How long do you plan to stay this time? A week. Lady Zemina, may I excuse myself now? Of course you can go, cat. Nibelin, sensing the unusual tension in the air, quickly began to exit the scene. Vlad discreetly gestured behind his back, asking him not to leave, but knowing when to make oneself scarce was a valuable trait for a member of society. Oh, it smells so good, I quite like that meat stew. That's potato stew. You hate potatoes? I decided I'd start liking them today. The potato stew looks truly delicious. Nibelin floated along like water despite Vlad's silent efforts to dissuade him. Vlad lowered his head in exasperation as he watched Nibelin disappear down the hallway Zemina had created. The guests keep arriving, but there's no space left. It seems they'll open the 4th floor soon as well. This time I had no other choice. You know, the Orthodox Church requested it. Yes, I know, I went after the witches at Andreas' request, to quell the embers of the war and at times to hunt down surviving witches. For 2 years Vlad had traveled the world, never putting down his sword. But don't you think it's time to rest a little? Back then I spent nearly several months bedridden. Of course, I'd like to rest too. Ha. You don't realize it because you're still young. But Zemina, who had been watching from the sidelines, knew well. The current Vlad was moving to fill the void in his heart rather than doing what he needed to. Later, when you grow older, all of this will return to you as bone disease. You know what happens to mercenaries who act recklessly, right? Take a long break this time. I heard Harvin returned as well. People around me praise me every time I swing my sword. But Vlad gave a bitter smile to the only person who told him it was time to rest. Hey, Vlad hesitated as he opened his mouth toward Zemina, who had turned her back as if she had already seen it coming. What? I'm going somewhere again right now. Really? When Vlad said he had to leave as soon as he returned, Zemina's eyes began to cool again. Go, I'm busy. A stubborn boy who always tried to follow his own path, no matter what others said. Zemina, who knew there was nothing she could do because she understood him better than anyone else, let out a soft sigh and began to descend the stairs. Shall we go together this time? However, even Zemina couldn't help but freeze in shock at the words she had just heard, this time not alone but together. Zemina was surprised by those words and turned to see Vlad holding out a letter from Vayezid in front of her. Would you like to come with me to the Rudiger succession ceremony? Together, the succession ceremony of the Rudiger family, where all the nobles of the north would gather. Zemina was well aware that asking her to go there with him had a deeper meaning than just companionship. Can I go? Of course, I can't take anyone but you. Really? As she saw Zemina's face gradually soften, Vlad began to smile along with her. However, even his smiling face couldn't help but harden when Zemina opened the letter she had taken out. I don't think so. Zemina pulled out a letter as if to review it. On the outside of the letter was a white tree emblem that Vlad was very familiar with. I was going to give it to you tomorrow so you could rest today, but I have no choice. For some reason, Zemina's smile while holding that letter seemed cold. I have to decide, Vlad, who will I take with me to the succession ceremony? A letter filled with the scent of lemons, sent with a rose's smile. The person who sent the letter was Baroness Alicia Hainel, another one of Vlad's ladies. This year's crop has been excellent, my lady. Everyone is pleased with the good harvest. The city of Dermer filled with the sense of summer. Through the window behind her, the trees of Dermer, greener than ever this year, greeted Alicia. Really, this year was a good harvest. Thanks to trade with the elves, the city prospered, and the faces of the people in Dermer, the territory of Hainel, were full of smiles. And what good is that? Pardon? However, on Alicia's face, the lady of the city, there was no smile of joy but rather a deep shadow. What good is it that the harvest is bountiful and the territory thrives? Everything was going well, but within Alicia's heart there was an unease she could not shake. What good is it for the territory to flourish when Hainel itself is withering? Lady Alicia. Even though her face was shadowed, the lady of Hainel was still beautiful. But Alicia felt sorrowful, for there was no one to appreciate that beauty. Have any marriage proposals come for me, whether from a noble or even a knight of no status? That. In response to Alicia's question, the old knight Duncan lowered his head as if unsure of what to say. Not a single one this year. Not a single one. Yes, not a single one. In the past, marriage proposals that would have come in abundance had recently ceased altogether. Baroness Alicia had wealth, fame, and even a territory. However, though she had everything, there was a clear reason why no young man dared to propose to her. It's all because of Vlad. Watching Alicia shake her head and shout seemed quite odd. However, Duncan simply nodded as if he understood her feelings. Why did he have to become so famous and ruin all my chances of marriage? Lady Alicia's knight, Vlad Oreo. Now that everyone across the continent knew of their relationship, with even rumors of exchanged handkerchiefs, no one dared propose to the lady of the Swordmaster. Will this be the end of the Hainal line? Will I be remembered as the ungrateful daughter who let her family die? Oh, Lady Alicia. If this was how it was going to end, she wished she had never started anything with Vlad. Alicia regretted that because of Vlad, her legacy and her family's treasure were destined to fade away. No, this can't be. I can't let Hainal, which I've protected for so long, be lost. Alicia's eyes, as she gazed out the window, grew colder. It was like the last stand of the Hainal line, shaped by noble blood. At this point, I just need to secure his seed. Somehow, I must continue the lineage. Blonde hair and blue eyes. And furthermore, the bloodline of a sword master of this era, guaranteed. Alicia's eyes sparkled strangely as she dreamed of that possibility. As if supporting Alicia's decision, the trees of Dermer swayed gently. The small spirits dancing beneath the green trees and a white snake moving along the branches seemed to encourage her. What's gotten into them? What, are they celebrating something? Even the elves sent to the city seemed confused by the spirits celebrating joyfully, as if calling out to Alicia to secure the seed quickly. 242, extra 4 the liquor bottle in the light of sunset. In the eastern forest where lush green vegetation flourished lay Ossurin. In that place, surrounded by trees that grew as if they were walls, the laughter of children playing could be heard. This isn't right. Beneath the world tree, swaying as if delighting in the sound of children, sat a girl with platinum blonde hair basking in the summer sunlight. Her eyebrows, furrowed in concentration, showed a remarkable seriousness. Something was clearly bothering her. She lifted her pencil, measuring the angle like a professional. However, the paper in front of her was covered only in childlike drawings, a stark contrast to the seriousness on her face. I don't think lips look like that. Even the world tree, which leaned over to take a curious look, shook its branches in reaction to her clumsy artistic attempts. Although the girl was known as the most sensitive priestess to date, it seemed her artistic skills left much to be desired. Priestess. Yes, Barades appeared behind the priestess, who had been deep in thought, trying to figure out what was wrong. He was dressed in light clothing, suited for a scout accustomed to roaming the forest, but the bright emblem on his shoulder confirmed that he was a member of the Elder Council. No matter how much it's summer, staying outside too long isn't good for your health. No, it's just. The girl, who had abandoned her original name to become a priestess, seemed annoyed that her brother was speaking to her so formally. However, the affectionate smile Barades directed at his sister pleased her, so she decided to let it slide. When will you go to Sturma? Oh, I mean Lord Barades. To Sturma, there will be a succession ceremony. I think the name was Vayezid. The priestess of the world tree was intelligent, but she was still not well versed in the continent's political situation. Her mentioning something related to the north so suddenly left Barades slightly puzzled. Why bring that up out of nowhere? The Vayezid family, one of the victors of the Continental War. The succession ceremony for the family's new head to be held there was an event closely watched by not just the north but the entire continent, and Ossurin was planning to send a delegation. I would like you to go, Lord Barades. Why? The girl's face looked somewhat uncomfortable as she scratched her chin. With her head lowered as though embarrassed, the priestess looked around to ensure no one was nearby and gestured for Barades to come closer. I want you to go there, brother. Just this once, not as the priestess of the world tree, but as her true self. Then, with a smile, the girl whispered into Barades's ear. Because then I could go with you. It was her fate to spend her entire life by the world tree, but this time she wanted to venture out. As if to justify herself, the girl lifted the drawing she had been working on and showed it to Barades. It's not just that I want to see the outside world, I want to show this to Vlad. The paper the girl held was full of awkward, messy drawings. It was a difficult drawing to interpret like the old prophecies, but this time it didn't seem to require complex interpretation. Because even Barades could immediately grasp the meaning behind that drawing. Is it a prophecy? Although the drawing style was the same, this time it didn't need much effort to understand it. Because even Barades could decipher it just by looking. I think Vlad would like it, don't you? Even though the children's ears were different, it was clear they were half human and elven children playing under the same tree. Seeing the girl smiling among those children, Barades couldn't help but feel momentarily confused, caught between reality and fiction. The highest hill in the city of Sora. A man walked toward the convent on that hill carrying various items. Wow, why is this so heavy? Thud, a heavy sound echoed on the ground as pieces of red meat scattered, showing their vibrant color. Each of those pieces bore the emblem of the Canner family, a clear sign that they were high-quality meats, expensive in anyone's eyes. Who's there? Marcella, it's me. Thanks to the noise he made, a woman emerged from the kitchen. The scarf tightly wrapped around her head concealed her thick black hair. Her skirt was stained, as if she had been working until just a moment ago. Vlad, is that you, Vlad? It's been a while, maybe half a year. Despite her simple appearance, her smile at Vlad was still as beautiful as ever. Well, look who it is. Such an honor to have someone so distinguished in such a humble place. Where should I put this? Oh my, look at all this meat. I was just wondering what to feed the children today. Madame Marcella, once known as the Rose of Sora. But her smile now was far warmer than in those days of splendor, and Vlad found it more comforting than ever. I brought meat that's easy to boil. Roasting each piece would be too much work. Yes, yes. Always so thoughtful. With the meat in his arms, Vlad followed Marcella's instructions and entered the kitchen. The same kitchen where years ago a red-haired girl cried while washing the dishes. Oh, Vlad, it's been so long. Look who's here. How broad his shoulders are now. Don't touch him like that. He's a sword master now. The kitchen was filled with women greeting Vlad enthusiastically. Every hand that reached out to him was familiar, as if the smiles from the past still lingered in this place. So this is where you all ended up. We retired and we didn't have anywhere else to go. It's better to take care of children than to deal with men. They were women who once sold laughter and drinks for a gleaming coin. But now their smiles were warm and welcoming, something money couldn't buy. I'm glad to see you're all well. Come visit us more often, Vlad. Yes, stay a bit at home. Stop giving Zemina headaches. For every word he spoke, he received 10 joyful responses. The kitchen grew louder with the arrival of their old friend until Marcella hurried Vlad out, pulling him by the arm. How did you manage to keep the convent? Didn't the church object? The church. I don't know much about that. Following Marcella, Vlad stopped before a door on the second floor with a sign that read Director's Office. I just told the mayor I wanted to use the empty building. It was empty? Yes, it's been vacant for a long time. It used to be the Mother Superior's office, but now it was the office of the orphanage director. Vlad remembered the place where he had once issued threats to the Mother Superior, and he looked at the old church symbol while pressing his lips together. I suppose everyone fled. Naturally, facing a swordmaster is no easy task. Marcella laughed, saying she'd never expected the nuns to run away in the middle of the night. And if they ever complain, who cares? I've donated enough to this place. That's true. The former house of nuns who sold the name of God to the daughters of Sora's rich. Now transformed into a haven for lost children, Vlad smiled nostalgically as he looked at the place. You're amazing, Marcella. No one else in the north has done anything similar outside the church. I do it because I want to, not because it's easy. Though she had saved money, taking care of orphan children wasn't something anyone could do, let alone a woman on her own. So why don't you leave a donation before you go, Master Vlad? Marcella had accomplished what no one else could. She had built the highest building in the backstreets that no gang leader could have constructed. You're incredible, Marcella. Enough flattery, leave some money. Marcella extended her hands toward Vlad, suggesting he leave something for the orphanage. From the office window, a few children peeked, timidly watching the Swordmaster. A prostitute who once brought innocent girls to the convent in a harsh winter. Some said she didn't deserve divine forgiveness, but the place where Marcella smiled was, without a doubt, the closest to God's will. Perhaps this winter no one would be sitting at the convent entrance. Why don't you stay for dinner? No thanks. Has Zemina told you to come back soon? It's not that, really. Despite Marcella's efforts to keep him there for dinner, Vlad, who already had other plans, left the orphanage quietly. I'll be back soon. I'll still be here in Sora after all. All right, come back soon. Behind Vlad, the children crowded around to say goodbye. Seeing their bright eyes, so similar to those of the children who used to roam the alleyways, Vlad scratched his chin, thoughtful. For now, use this place however you like. I'll speak with the mayor to make it official. All right, and take this. After a brief hesitation, Vlad took a small pouch from his pocket and handed it to Marcella. What's this? A seed. Marcella opened the bag, curious, and found an unfamiliar fruit inside. It gleamed like a jewel, and anyone who saw it would know it was something extraordinary. What kind of seed is it? I don't know. It won't be clear until it's grown. Vlad smiled faintly as he continued speaking. Still, I think those seeds will do well here. Really? A small seed from Ossarin. Vlad didn't truly know what the seed Marcella held would become, but he knew that after a long time, it would likely grow into something like the trees of Debrecci or Dermer. I'll be on my way now. All right, someone has to plant these green seeds to nurture young potential, like the sword master of a previous age who secretly journeyed across the world, or like the woman before me now. It's been a day since I've done something meaningful. Vlad departed, waving as he gazed at the red sunset descending over the hill. I said it was time to come here. Vlad walked down from Sora's highest hill toward the pier, now filled with the scent of fish. Perhaps because the night's chill was setting in, a fog began to gather slowly along the river running through Sora. Nothing here has changed either. It was a quiet dock, empty even of workers, as there were no ships coming or going. Standing alone in this deserted place, Vlad raised his hand to the ever-redder sunset. But we can still have dinner together. Today's sunset dipped beneath the riverbed. There was a boat making its way upriver, silhouetted against the sunset. The boat, with peculiar-looking water wheels on either side of its hull, flew the now familiar flag of the Red Rose. "It's a little late, shelter." Vlad walked along the dock as the sunset deepened, with a boat gliding alongside him. In Vlad's right hand, as he walked this way, a bottle of liquor he'd brought especially for his friend was now stained with the colors of the setting sun. 243, extra 5, the children who became adults. The alley lights reflected clearly on the river's water, tinted red by the sunset. Until recently, that shadowy corner of the city had seemed peaceful, but now it was alive with unexpected noise and vibrant activity. "So you've been at odds with Barbosa all this time?" More like a tense balance rather than an outright conflict. With Vlad and Harvin's arrival, the smile of a rose was busier than ever, though a tense atmosphere hung over the lobby on the first floor. People dressed elegantly occupied the tables. Their clean and orderly appearance clashed with the usual feel of the place. Watching those patrons holding empty glasses and casting furtive glances upstairs, Zemina pursed her lips in displeasure. "Good thing you managed to reach a truce, otherwise we would have been stuck here until winter." "Yeah, winter at sea is brutally cold." While Harvin took a sip, Vlad watched him out of the corner of his eye. His face was now suntanned, and he wore a sailor's hat crusted with sea salt, a completely different image from the refined man once buried in piles of paperwork in closed rooms. "Hey, here you go." "Oh. Thanks, Ned." Just then their food arrived, and Harvin reached for a coin in his pocket, but Ned quickly left without accepting the tip, a rare move for him. What's gotten into him? He's always looking for a tip. He must have his reasons. Otter eyed his brother suspiciously at the unexpected change, but Vlad merely shrugged. Someday they'd have that conversation, but tonight he preferred not to hear complaints. "So have you finished your work? Are you going back to your old post?" Yes. Harvin and his sailors had initially been a modest merchant company navigating the northern seas. If not for the war, they would have solidified their influence by leveraging Vlad's connections. Perfect timing. The Ravnoma family just asked me to find a company to open a trade route. Now that the war had ended with the Golden Duke Barbosa's surrender, it was time for everyone to return to their previous roles. Vlad, excited by the idea of seeing his friends return, took a bite of the sausage he was holding. If it's in Trinova, it's close to Nidavellir. Maybe they could even share a port. Exactly. Then with trade routes open, they'll start bringing in steady income, not small amounts either, but sizable ones. Although Vlad had risen to the position of Swordmaster out of honor, it didn't mean he didn't need money. Unlike Kahano, the Swordmaster of the previous generation, Vlad didn't have a stable foundation. While he wished to remain free, unbound to any one place, he had decided to build his fortune through a merchant company. "How about we go big this time, buy a new ship, hire more people?" Talking about money might sound self-serving, but Vlad's enthusiasm was unmistakable. "Go big, we could form a fleet like Barbosa's." "Admiral sounds better than captain, don't you think?" Harvin smiled, recalling the dreams they had shared in the alleyway as children, talking about their futures. "With the money we earn, we could help the orphanage kids, or better yet, recruit kids and train them to become sailors." Back then, alone and with no one to look after them, the only way to comfort themselves was by imagining a shared future. Those tales of a better tomorrow gave them the strength to endure the present with all its hardship and hunger. "Vlad, yes, I have something to tell you." But no matter how much they shared as brothers, sooner or later each had to find his own path. Because children always grow up into adults, I received a request. A request? Children only dream of the stars, but adults chase after them. Even if their paths were different, Vlad and Harvin had walked together in the past. But now each would follow the road they had chosen. "Count Arnstein asked me to open an Arctic route." "An Arctic route?" "Yes, a route through the Arctic beyond the northern border." The blue-eyed boy looked at the starry sky, while the limping boy dreamed of crossing the narrow river and venturing into the open sea. The young men who once shared those dreams now looked at each other as adults. It seems that the higher-ups want an alternative to the southern route dominated by Barbosa. Vlad's voice was calm, perhaps out of consideration for the eager Harvin. "It's as if he wouldn't go if I held him back." "That request, I'd like to take it on, what do you think?" Yet Vlad could recognize the excitement in Harvin's eyes hidden beneath his calm exterior. Even as he casually swirled his drink, Harvin's brown eyes already sparkled with a determination he couldn't hide. "I see." Harvin, who was born by the river, wanted to venture out to the sea. To the vast ocean that didn't care about my limping steps. Because this was a friend who had finally said he wanted to find his own way, Vlad could only smile. What a headache. Now it was time for even the lively alleyways to close their eyes. After sharing endless rounds of liquor, Vlad climbed the stairs to the fourth floor, his head throbbing. Maybe I should have drunk more, being half drunk is worse. Harvin, Otter, and later Zemina, who had joined them, lay slumped over the table. The blame lay with Harvin, who, after discovering the authentic way to enjoy Captain Q, had mixed all kinds of drinks with that horrid liquor. As he climbed the stairs, Vlad noticed a faint light flickering in the hallway on the fourth floor, reserved exclusively for guests. It was coming from Nibelung's room. "What are you doing up? Huh, haven't you gone to sleep yet?" Normally, Vlad wouldn't have gone in, but curiosity, fueled by the alcohol, led him to approach unsteadily. Nibelung's room was a complete mess, a chaos that anyone would consider extreme. "What's all this?" The room was filled with knickknacks from who knows where. Among them were strange gadgets and carpets Vlad vaguely recognized. "I'm organizing my pack. I haven't done it in 5 years." "Your pack?" "Yes, the one I always carry with me." Vlad's gaze landed on a backpack in the corner, the same magical backpack from which Nibelung always seemed to pull out exactly what he needed in moments of danger. Now the enormous bag was surprisingly empty. "I've always wondered how much can you actually fit in that thing. In my pack, well," Nibelung scratched his head as he replied, surrounded by his belongings. "There's no fixed limit. I can store as much as I can remember." "How much can you remember? If I forget something I put in, the pack simply swallows it up." Oh, Nibelung mentioned that since he wasn't especially good at remembering, he couldn't store as much as previous users. However, the objects that filled the room and even spilled into the hallway were enough that anyone could easily forget what was in there. "Why are you organizing it in the middle of the night?" "Because I'm leaving with Harvin." "To where?" Beastfolk of this era had plenty of places to go, even if nowhere truly welcomed them. You could say that Nibelung, also a mage in search of mysteries, was a natural-born wanderer. "I'm going with Harvin. It looks like he's going to explore an Arctic route." A beastfolk mage who could travel anywhere with just a pack. But this time it wasn't a journey without aim, it was an expedition with a clear purpose. "And why do you want to explore the Arctic route? It's a place no one's been before." Nibelung's eyes curved into a wide smile, and Vlad couldn't help feeling somewhat bitter over that assured resolve. "Besides, they say the climate's warming up lately, good for lemon cultivation. When dragons ruled, there had been a land of beastfolk that sank. Maybe now with the ice melting, there could be habitable land. If we found a place like that, the scattered tribes could gather in one place." The elves and dwarves now had their own territories, but only the beastfolk remained scattered, unable to find land to call their own. Tribes like the Ruga, who found a place to settle, could be considered truly fortunate. "It would be wonderful if the children of our tribe had a place where they could run and play freely, like the ones here." Nibelung was determined to leave, both for his life's purpose as a mage who pursued the mystical and for the well-being of his people. His words were logical, but to Vlad, somewhat drunk, there was only a deep feeling of sorrow. "Yes, you should go then." Vlad had returned hoping to be welcomed by everyone, but now those children who had grown up into adults were setting off on their own paths. As with all the friendships he had lost over the years, each of his friends was also leaving. "I suppose I should keep drinking." "You're going to drink more? I'm in the mood for it today." Vlad turned and began descending the stairs, leaving Nibelung as he packed his belongings. He passed through the darkened hallway, past the table where his friends lay sprawled out. With a bottle of liquor in hand, Vlad stepped out into the streets of early morning, still cloaked in shadows. "Who would have put a fence here?" Vlad pushed through a neatly kept hedge and opened the gate and a fence. "This does look better now." In that chaotic neighborhood of overlapping buildings, the only spot with a bit of green was the cemetery. Vlad walked among the graves, better tended than before, and stopped in front of one that looked familiar. "How have you been, Kahano?" The cemetery was filled with simple headstones, with colorful flowers growing here and there as if embracing the graves of the dead. "I brought a drink for you too." Smiling at the flowers, Vlad poured some liquor onto the surrounding graves. Before him lay an unknown old blacksmith, and behind him a nameless noble knight. Between them, Vlad sat down and raised the bottle as if it were now his turn to take a drink. "Everyone's leaving. It hasn't even been that long since I saw them again." Although he disliked showing weakness here in this quiet place, Vlad allowed himself to express his true feelings. "If they all go, who will stay by my side?" Kahano, Joseph, and so many others he had crossed paths with. Now he had more broken bonds than those still intact, and feeling the hollow ache in his chest, Vlad lifted the bottle again. "But I've given them proper farewells. Isn't that something good?" He understood that he was able to say goodbye to his friends because back then others had also shown him how to do it. He knew that if those who now lay here resting hadn't pushed him forward, he wouldn't be who he was. Well, it seems everyone here is silent. No matter how much he talked, the nameless graves couldn't answer him. Already in their eternal silence, they had no more words to offer Vlad. Only the sunrise, slowly peeking over the horizon, touched Vlad's back with its warmth. Enjoying that gentle light, Vlad decided to stay a little longer than he'd planned. It felt as if Kahano from behind were giving him one final parting touch. T/and 244, extra 6 preparations for farewell. The green spreading up from the south was coloring the continent, though it seemed it hadn't reached this place yet. Sturma, the northernmost city in Vayezid territory. In one of its rooms, the sound of coughing still lingered, a remnant of winter. "Are you all right?" The faint candlelight beside the bed illuminated Peter's face. But Peter's expression remained shadowed, as if that small light wasn't enough to dispel the darkness within. Peter Vayezid, who had defended the north against the invasions of the Golden Duke and Gaydar, was now praised as the Northern Wall. Yet even he bore deep wrinkles on his face, traces of the hardships of the past 2 years. Don't worry. Where Peter looked, a woman lay, her color slowly fading. Her hair had grown brittle and her lips were chapped. Watching Oksana as she lay weakly, Peter's gaze could not hide his concern. I'll at least try to stand for Rudiger's succession ceremony. Yet Oksana's vacant eyes were not on Peter but on the window beside her. Peter, seeing that she didn't even seem to have the strength to turn her head toward him, spoke gently. That's not what I meant. Though she was withering away, losing her will to live, Oksana clung to her sense of duty. Seeing her like this, Peter felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if he were looking at someone who no longer belonged to this world. Is the wind making you cold? Would you like me to close the curtains? The window was shut, but a chill seeped in through the frames. Even with summer approaching, the northern night air still held a touch of cold. Peter rose to close the curtains, worried about the draft, but Oksana's voice stopped him. Leave them open. Though closing them would be better for her frail body, Oksana's determined voice, wanting to see outside, made Peter let go of the curtain's edge. Keep them open. If I can't see the outside, I feel trapped. All right. After that, silence settled between them. It wasn't a silence born from a lack of words, but a calm born from caution, making the air in the room feel dense. The moonlight is bright. Night was advancing, and soon it would be time for Peter to leave. Yet his feet remained planted, drawn to the view outside. Something in the landscape had captured his attention. Perhaps it would be better to open the window a bit. There, under the moonlight, a small gravestone stood. It didn't seem like much time had passed since it was placed, and it was close enough that even Oksana could see it from her bed. Peter knew it. He knew that the curtains he held had likely never been closed, not even in the depths of winter. For in silent longing, this mother still yearned for her son and didn't want to look away from him. In the deep night, beneath the pale light of the moon, a father, a mother, and their son looked quietly outside. That night the wind felt colder than usual. The tea is too sweet. Sunlight filled the mayor's office in Sora, and Vlad, sitting at the visitor's table, grimaced as he lowered his cup. Really, I put less sugar in yours on purpose. I've told you before, if you keep drinking tea this sweet, you're going to die young. Much had changed over the past 2 years, but the mayor's office in Sora seemed unchanged. Although some faces were now absent, the cozy atmosphere and sweet scent of tea remained the same. Die young, look at the pile of papers here. With or without sugar, I'll be gone sooner rather than later. In response to Vlad's scolding about the sugar, Borden waved his hands as if to draw his attention to the towering stacks of documents around the mayor's seat. Vlad, looking at the piles of papers, took another sip from his cup without a word. I cleared everything yesterday, but today there's already another mountain. Why is this city so exhausting? Between post-war reconstruction efforts, the never-ending stream of orphans arriving, and the nights drawn to the fame of the Swordmaster, Borden, the new mayor of Sora, had more work than hours in the day. If I die early, it'll be half your fault. I've already noted it in my will. Just drink your tea before it gets cold. Like a boiling cauldron, Sora continued to function thanks to Borden, a capable and dedicated mayor. Although he wasn't a knight skilled with a sword, Joseph had trusted him for his remarkable administrative talents. So what brings you here? I need a favor. What kind of favor? Vlad, somewhat reluctant to interrupt Borden in the middle of his work, began to speak cautiously. The convent up the hill. What about it? The ownership seems a bit unclear, and I'd like it to be officially endorsed. Even a renowned swordmaster had to respect certain principles, especially in Vayezid territory. Also, Harvin is about to embark on a long journey. I'd appreciate it if you could support him with personnel for repairs to the ship and some supplies. Borden, while reviewing some papers, massaged his temples, visibly overwhelmed. It's funny, really, you somehow manage to ask for things that push the limits of what I can grant. Borden frowned as he looked at Vlad, though a faint smile played on his lips. You ask for things I can't easily refuse but are also difficult to grant. It was hard to ignore the request of a renowned sword master, and Vlad's favors seemed precisely calculated, making Borden agree despite his packed schedule. No matter how busy you are, I learned this here. Yes, I see you've learned well. The boy from the alleyways, once ignorant of worldly matters, was gone. Now before Borden stood a young man with vision and insight, someone who had learned from experience. Joseph would have loved to see you like this. Really? Hearing that familiar name on Borden's lips, Vlad couldn't help but give a faint, bitter smile, that man whose shadow had always provided him shelter. Joseph, with his presence so vivid in his memories, was an image Vlad could never erase from his mind. Well, I'll take that as a yes. Yes, go easy. As he stood up, Vlad took one last look at Borden, who had returned to his paperwork. The mayor's office was still familiar, though something about it was subtly different. Vlad averted his gaze, feeling strangely unsettled by those small changes. He's going to feel hurt. If he's human, he can't help it. As Vlad exited the mayor's office and walked down the corridor, the town hall staff quickly bowed their heads in respect. How can everyone think only of themselves? Don't they realize who's responsible for getting them to this position? Can't you shut up already? Shut up, of course I can. I Goth would do anything the captain asked me to do. For most people, the annoyance of a sword master would be alarming, but Goth simply answered with a sly grin. Just like that time I held the captain up drunk beside the grave, always right there for Sir Vlad while all those important wizards and captains drift away, Goth will never abandon him. You said you'd shut up. Vlad grumbled at Goth, who kept talking as if he'd only been waiting to be interrupted. Yet the most loyal squire in all the land merely stepped back, chuckling. By the way, Captain, when do we leave for Sturma? Stop following me. I've already prepared everything, the servants in the carriage. And why would we need a carriage? Though Vlad found his audacity irritating, he knew Goth was someone who often proved useful. Are we not bringing Miss Zemina as well, or did you plan to seat her on a single horse? One can't bring a lady without a proper carriage. I've arranged for an elegant one already. Goth had stood by Vlad's side ever since he had disguised himself as Rimmon in his prayers, and after Vlad's banishment from Sora, continued to watch over him. He was one of the few who could anticipate Vlad's thoughts without a word spoken. I haven't decided that Zemina will go with us. Regardless, we should depart within a week. Though there are no longer bandits in the north, the roads remain dangerous. As if he hadn't heard Vlad's reply, Goth insisted they should leave in a week. The timing seemed to align with Vlad's own plan, so he closed his mouth without further objection. Oh, Noir, long time no see, do you remember me? Nay, reaching the stable, Goth greeted Noir, putting on a display of exaggerated warmth. That was the essential trait of a rogue, charm. Watching Goth pour on his unreserved friendliness, Noir only snorted, unable to resist. Come along, Captain, all you have to do is show up. Damn it. Despite his smile, Vlad couldn't suppress a curse, frustrated by Goth's persistence. But what Vlad didn't realize was that his somber expression had already begun to ease, though he was unaware of it himself. Following the setting sun, Vlad returned with a smile like a blooming rose and headed straight to Nibelung's room. Have you finished packing? Huh, yes, I've got everything ready. Nibelung's room, which had been a mess the day before, was now spotless as if chaos had never touched it. Only an overstuffed backpack betrayed the rush. Then follow me. Where are we going? Even if I told you, would you know where it is? Nibelung recalled the sorrowful look on Vlad's face when he'd been drinking the previous night. But today, Vlad seemed to have left behind the melancholy that had recently clung to him. Are you missing anything aside from what you packed? Emergency medicine, motion sickness tools. Miss Zemina is preparing those things. And why didn't you tell me? Because you don't have much money left, Lord Vlad. Now that he no longer served Vayezid, Vlad had no steady income. Aware of Vlad's situation, Nibelung was already receiving some assistance from Zemina. Is that so? Unable to argue about the money, Vlad led Nibelung to a quiet corner of an alleyway. Though it was now a bit better lit, only a local could navigate through the complicated passageways. Have you recharged your magical artifacts well? For a rugged journey like the Arctic, they'll come in handy. Hee, not yet. It's been years of constant use. The mage Vlad knew Nibelung wielded magic through enchanted items. At first glance, he might appear harmless, but he used objects that held special meaning according to the traditions of his tribe. Yes, true, you haven't had a break to recharge them with all the use. Vlad knew well that since they met, Nibelung hadn't had time to recharge his artifacts. Only he had seen dozens of his magical tools so far. Is it them? Huh, I'm asking if they're the ones who stole your spheres. Deep in the alley, Nibelung noticed the watchful eyes of a group of kids surrounding him. Among them, some faces looked familiar, and he nodded slightly. Yes, it's them. All right. Identifying his target, Vlad stepped forward. In his hand, he held a pouch filled with spheres, their soft texture stirring nostalgic memories from his childhood. Tell them to send out the leader. The feel of the spheres in his palm brought back simpler times. For his mage friend who would soon set off on a long journey, it was the best farewell gift he could offer. Vlad, the boy who now understood how to handle farewells, tossed the glowing spheres toward the kids, leaving behind a gesture that spoke louder than words. 245, extra 7, the path leading to starlight. No matter how hard they tried, the people of the North had always been burdened by the discriminatory gazes of others. To many, they were faithless souls who did not believe in God, or a vile race with the blood of barbarians coursing through their veins. For years, this was the prevailing perception of Northerners. Congratulations on becoming the new head of the family, Lord Rudiger Vayezid. However, in front of the gates of Castle Sturma, it seemed that this discrimination was fading into the past. Nobles from across the continent lined up to offer their congratulations. Not just northern nobles, but representatives of families from the far south had also attended the event. Flags bearing unfamiliar emblems fluttered in the wind, and even the reserved inhabitants of Sturma lifted their heads to catch a glimpse. Rudiger, not yet officially the head of the family but already sitting in the leader's seat, welcomed the guests one by one. At that moment, he noticed an unfamiliar flag approaching. That's the emblem of the House of Baron Dalmatia. It seems they recently redesigned it, Dorothea explained from his side. Rudiger nodded at her explanation, but the surprise was still evident on his face. He knew he shouldn't show such an expression in front of a guest, but anyone would have reacted the same way upon seeing Dalmatia's new emblem. Congratulations, Lord Rudiger. Thank you for coming from so far. The Vayezid family welcomes you. The territory of Debrecci, located in the northern part of the central region, had been too impoverished to participate in high society. However, they used Rudiger's succession ceremony as an opportunity to proudly display their flag. If I may, I have a question. Yes, Rudiger, breaking formal protocol, spoke after exchanging the customary greetings with Dalmatia's envoy. Even after the usual pleasantries were exchanged, Rudiger still held the envoy back. The exception drew the attention of all the nobles in the hall, who immediately directed their gazes toward Rudiger and the envoy. The emblem on your flag, could it be? Ah, you mean this, right? Dalmatia's envoy, uncomfortable under the unfamiliar attention, straightened his back with pride and unfurled the flag. Though his reaction was not particularly elegant, it elicited smiles from those present. It's a great source of pride for our territory. This design is based on a sacred beast approved by the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church, the words approved by the Orthodox Church brought a hush to the hall. Worshipping idols other than God was considered heretical, so the Church was known for its strict standards when approving symbols. So that creature, yes, that's correct. It's a mole. While other noble houses adorned their flags with walls, spears, or other prestigious symbols, the House of Baron Dalmatia had chosen something entirely different. It represents the spirit of the earth, which brings prosperity. The flag depicted a small, adorable mole with a friendly expression giving a thumbs up. It was impossible not to smile at such an emblem. Caillou. From Osserin to Dermer, the mole had dug paths that connected the east, center, and north. This creature, which had once worked alongside the Swordmaster and earned the blessing of the Orthodox Church, was now revered with great devotion in its homeland of Debrecci. There was a rumor spreading throughout the town. Shame on you, really, of all the things you could do, you get to play marbles with kids. On the docks of Sora, where the summer breeze was growing stronger, Zemina repeatedly poked Vlad in the side with her finger, her eyes narrowed in disapproval. Didn't you get to play as a child? Is this your idea of making up for lost time? That's not it. Well, it would have been less embarrassing if you'd gotten drunk and caused a scene. Isn't this just childish? Zemina murmured in a low voice, likely aware of the crowd around them, ensuring only Vlad could hear her. From a distance, anyone watching might have assumed the two were closer than they actually were. That's not it, Nibelin said he needed it. They say life from afar is a comedy, but up close it's a tragedy. Perhaps anyone who got close enough would have noticed Vlad's slightly worn expression. Nibelin needed children's marbles. Why would a cat need that? Well, it's magic, okay. Magic is something you can't believe unless you see it, nor understand unless you experience it. Explaining it to someone like Zemina, who had never encountered anything mystical, was almost impossible for Vlad. Even until the last moment, they're bickering as always. Watching the pair, a man descended from the dock. It was Captain Harvin, who had become an admired figure among the children of the alleyways. He walked, followed by a diverse group of robust men, including beastmen and dwarves. Harvin, now an object of envy for the children in the alleys, approached the two bickering figures. Yes, this is what one calls a homely scene. Is everything ready? Harvin, whose gait reflected his experience, wore a new captain's hat Zemina had prepared for him. To any observer, he was the perfect archetype of a seasoned sailor. Everything's ready. I even modified the cargo hold for the expedition and stocked the ship with enough liquor to keep the crew happy. With a grin, Harvin winked at Vlad. It seems someone pulled a few strings. Even in peak season, the shipyard prioritized us. This journey was entirely dependent on the season when the northern glaciers began to melt. Without luck, they could have lost an entire year, but thanks to Vlad, everything was ready for departure. Perhaps, around this time next year, we'll already be in Osserin. I'll write to you then. Agreed. The goal of this expedition was to discover a new maritime route through the Arctic. For that reason, Harvin's final destination was to circumnavigate half the continent and reach the elven city of Osserin. Well, you all have things to do too, so we'll depart now. In front of Harvin, who bid farewell with a smile, Goth yawned indifferently. The captain would head out to sea while the knight journeyed north. Dragging along even a carriage for emphasis, Goth seemed to be saying, it's time for us to leave as well. Take care, you too. With a simple bump of their shoulders, the two parted ways. They knew there was no need for elaborate goodbyes. Both now grown men understood that farewells were easier when kept natural. Sniff, hic. As Harvin climbed back onto the ship following his brief words of farewell, Vlad silently watched him. Suddenly, a sob echoed beside him. Sniff, that Harvin, sniff, look at how he doesn't even glance back, hic. The day was radiant and the wind, brushing through their hair, blew briskly. It was without a doubt the perfect day to set sail. However, Zemina, her eyes filled with tears, didn't seem to share the excitement. "That cold-hearted bastard. Let's go now, you're all so heartless." With an order echoing across the dock, the ropes anchoring the ship were released. Following the river's current, Harvin's ship, the Zemina of red hair, drifted away slowly. "He said he'd write to you next year, you'll see him then." The people of Sara waved vigorously at the ship receding into the distance. Harvin, who had been born in the humblest corners of an alley, was now heading to the farthest reaches of the world. They weren't bidding him farewell because he was off to make a living, they were sending him off because he was chasing a dream. While everyone waved at the ship, Vlad's gaze was fixed in a completely different direction. He was looking toward an old building by the dock, one that had once served as Captain Hoover's refuge. "Feeling better now that you're out of there?" From the carriage, Vlad directed his final farewell to the Harvin he once found trapped in a dark, suffocating room, his face pale. "Raise the sails, set them halfway up. Confirm our position. Explorers, check the constellations." The salty scent of the sea was beginning to overpower the metallic tang of the river water. As the sun slowly sank below the horizon, Harvin's ship sailed northward. While the crew moved quickly to prepare for the night, one figure stood still beside the captain. "What are you doing here?" Nibelin, standing next to Harvin at the helm, a spot reserved only for the captain, seemed entirely unaware of the rules. He stared intently at the twilight sky, indifferent to the inquisitive glances of the passing sailors or their awkward throat clearing. "If you don't have anything to do, I can find something for you." "I'm not here because I've nothing to do." To the left, the sea reflected a red sunset that had yet to meet the horizon. However, Nibelin seemed to already be gazing at stars in the night sky, holding a small magical sphere to his eye. There. After a long while, he finally found the star he was searching for. It was the North Star, the guide for all sailors navigating the night sea. "What's going on? I just saw it." "What?" Harvin continued to ask questions as though still unaccustomed to speaking with a mage. But over time, Harvin would learn, just as Vlad had, mysteries cannot be explained, they must be experienced. "The North Star, it's seen us." The glow of a star in the sky reflected its light onto the sphere Nibelin held, which contained the sparkles collected from the children. "I knew this sphere would attract the star's attention." Two lights connected, one in the sky and one at sea, tracing a path northward, from the ocean to the night sky toward some place in the north where they were headed. "What is this line?" There would always be someone, a child like Vlad or Nibelin, who looked upward to find the way. The light of the two connected stars seemed to split the sea, carving out a line. As if to lead them, as if to ensure no one got lost. "Looks like we won't be needing a compass, will we?" And so, following the path marked by the stars, Harvin's ship continued its course toward the world's edge, beyond the boundaries of known seas. 246, Extra 8, a new era. The bright midday sun illuminated Brigantes, the capital of the empire. A city founded by Kahano Frosin, the founding king and master of the sword, symbolizing the end of the age of dragons and the dawn of the age of humans. However, Brigantes, which should have shone with glory, was steeped in deep silence. The young emperor has been sent back to his homeland. In one of the opulent rooms of the imperial palace, decorated with great splendor, the courtier Armand stared at the teacup in front of him. The room, seemingly dimly lit, remained dark save for a faint ray of light filtering through the window landing on the cup. "I wonder if that boy will live long enough to fulfill his destiny." Timur, the Iron Duke, who stood by the window holding a teacup, paused at those words. The imperial palace, in its solemn stillness, seemed frozen in time. The sound of Armand's voice echoing in that silence wasn't just unsettling, it carried something deeply disturbing, something Timur couldn't ignore. It would be proper to leave matters concerning the palace to the royal court. With those words, Timur tacitly seemed to approve of Armand's plans, prompting the courtier to nod slowly. "The war is over and the false emperor has been dethroned. Now all that remains is an empty imperial palace." Armand's voice was weathered by the years, rusted by the weight of time. Yet his eyes, fixed on Timur's back, gleamed with an almost feverish intensity. "Restoring the rightful sun to the sky, that is my final duty as a courtier in this era." Armand, tasked with protecting the throne and maintaining court order, had succeeded in expelling the false emperor. However, the bloodshed that ensued instilled fear among the empire's citizens. Even so, the old man's gaze was now focused on a knight of the north, as if his mission was far from over. "I beg you to help me. We cannot allow the line of the empire to end here." The empire, which marked the beginning of the age of humans, had begun with one man, and the legitimacy of its lineage could only endure through the blood of House Frosin and the will of the sword passed down by the Silver Knight. With your mastery of the sword and having earned the title of Master of the Sword, no one else in the continent holds greater legitimacy. Even if descended from the blood of the dragons you so despise. Timur cast a cold glance at the aged Armand. Though the dragon's breath had corrupted the empire, the courtier, worn down by time, had been powerless to protect anything on his own. The mixture of disdain and pity in Timur's eyes toward Armand was almost instinctual. That makes it even better. Being the child of a dragon, he chose to kill his own father for the sake of the Empire. For the sake of the Empire, you say? Timur let out a bitter smile as he placed the teacup back on the table at Armand's words. So that's what you saw in that duel. It is natural for the same scene to be perceived differently depending on who views it, but Timur disliked how Armand interpreted Vlad's duel to suit his own interests. Will you help me? The Empire's glorious continuity had to be preserved. Even if its roots were rotten and its branches grew twisted, countless lives depended on the shelter the Empire provided. No, Timur's response was clear and direct. Why? Timur took a step back away from the window. Because this isn't a matter we can decide between the two of us. As Timur stepped back, the hidden light began to fill the room. Little by little, the darkness receded, revealing an object that had been concealed, a white table. It was round, designed so that all present could look directly at one another. Count Peter has decided to hand over the leadership of House Vayezid to his son. If that young man takes charge, the Iron Duke could easily. The next imperial meeting will include representatives from Ossurin and Nidavellir. Timur pulled the curtains wide open, letting sunlight flood the room. The bright light forced Armand to shield his eyes as Timur offered a faint smile. We are transitioning from the age of dragons to the age of the Empire, and now we may be on the brink of a new era. Armand opened his eyes and turned his head, but Timur was already at the door, his hand on the knob. Let the decisions of this new era be made by new people. A new era, new people, and a new master of the sword. Timur, who had opened the door for them, walked out of the room without looking back. It was as though there was no place for him at this new round table that had been prepared. Iron Duke. As the cold northern wind faded, only Armand remained, unsure of where to turn. With trembling hands, he looked toward the open door, feeling the breeze slowly filling the room. Finally, he bowed his head in silence. Now that the weather seemed to soften, the road to Sturma was completely filled with mud. Goth, seated at the coachman's perch, grumbled that they should have departed earlier. However, Zemina, gazing out the window, seemed to enjoy the journey, smiling constantly. So that thing that looks like a tower, is it a dragon? Yes. Technically, it's a deathworm. It lives in the west. In the distant plains, Zemina observed something towering into the sky like a spire. That enormous creature, visible even from afar, was a western deathworm that had surfaced to breathe. When there was that tremor a little while ago, I got a real scare. It's the first time I've ever felt an earthquake. Really? Vlad smiled at Zemina's excited voice, still filled with awe. Her reaction reminded Vlad of the first time he had seen a deathworm years ago. They usually come north to bask in the sun at this time of year. But something that big must eat a ton. Doesn't it attack people? They don't do things like that. They feed on minerals they find underground. Except for the one that Vlad and Rudiger had to confront, deathworms rarely attacked humans. Perhaps that one too would have avoided disturbing the north if it hadn't been cursed with dark magic. You've learned a lot, Vlad. Where did you pick all this up? Zemina, leaning on the carriage window sill, turned her gaze to Vlad. Today, she seemed especially impressed by the way he answered everything calmly and precisely, projecting a maturity she hadn't noticed before. It's not something you learn. Walking alongside the carriage with Noir by his side, Vlad let out a small chuckle at Zemina's comment. I just heard it in passing. In truth, he hadn't formally studied it but vividly recalled someone telling him about deathworms. Thinking that, if not for that man, he wouldn't now be seeing Zemina's bright, amazed eyes, Vlad couldn't help scratching his nose. Ah, I wish I had some whiskey. Don't even think about it, that's a special order for gifting. A sip wouldn't hurt, even Rudiger would probably forgive that. Are you crazy? Absolutely not. Zemina reacted with alarm to Vlad's words, though he had no actual intention of drinking. He only wanted to relive memories of times when he'd traveled that same path before, thinking of how whiskey had been a companion on those journeys. A sunny day like this would be perfect with a glass of whiskey. The green plains and blue skies, with the majestic death worm in the middle. Recalling the days when he barely knew how to ride a horse, Vlad felt nostalgic for the whiskey Joseph had given him back then. Whoa, wait, what the hell is this? Traveling by carriage from Sora to Sturma, Vlad and his group finally reached their destination. However, upon arriving at the city, Goth halted the carriage, unable to go any further. Captain, this is why I said we should have come earlier. Look at all these carriages. Even after all these years, Sturma's walls remained imposing, but what caught Vlad's attention was the long line of carriages stretching out from the city gates. Vlad, look at that. What thing? Apart from the carriages, they've brought loads of carts full of stuff. If each noble house had only sent one carriage, the congestion wouldn't have been so severe. But the people arriving were here to celebrate the succession of the new leader of House Vayezid. Evidently, no one had come empty-handed. They had brought carts loaded with gifts and expensive belongings, crowding the area outside Sturma. Maybe we should have brought more gifts. We're looking a bit humble here. Humble, what are you talking about? Surrounded by luxurious carriages, Zemina began to hunch her shoulders slightly. Though Goth had made an effort to secure a decent carriage, it was a borrowed one. And compared to the extravagant offerings from others, their gifts seemed modest, making Zemina feel self-conscious. Now that I think about it, all these people are nobles, right? Is it okay for me to be here? Of course it is, your Lady Zemina. It was Zemina's first time experiencing the world of high nobility, and her insecurity was clear. Noticing her discomfort, Vlad began searching for a way to escape the endless line of carriages. Captain, Captain, what is it? Someone's coming from the front, the carriages are making noise. Before Vlad could come up with a solution, something began to stir in the line. The carriages and their occupants appeared agitated. Could it be someone important? Everyone's stepping out to look. Who could it be? Hearing that someone significant was approaching, Zemina quickly slid into the corner of the carriage as if trying to avoid being seen. Noticing her nervousness, Vlad remained silent, though unfortunately the person everyone was anticipating seemed to have business directly with them. Get out. Huh? Dressed in elegant clothing but with a brazen attitude, a man knocked on the carriage door with brusque force. I said get out, don't draw too much attention here. The man wore a black patch over his left eye, making him appear even more intimidating. Though Zemina swallowed nervously, the man simply gave her a smile when their eyes met. Jaeger, you're late as always, still someone who needs to be watched over. It was Jaeger, the new captain of the Knights of House Vayezid. Known for training the most honorable knights, Jaeger was renowned across the continent. But as usual, he regarded his former pupil with a stern and distant expression. 247, Extra 9 The mansion that remained unchanged. The halls of the mansion, which Vlad had not visited in a long time, carried an air of familiarity. This was the Vayezid residence, the place he had arrived at following Joseph, carrying only a sword during those frigid winter days. However, unlike back then when everything felt foreign, this mansion now felt like a second home. Nothing has changed in this mansion. There's no reason for it to change. Although it's been a little livelier lately. Following Jaeger, Vlad turned his head from side to side, taking in the sights of the mansion. The scene was nostalgic, bringing back memories as Vlad retraced the same paths he had walked as a squire. I didn't know you'd become the captain of the knights. They passed the dining hall where he had recently shared sausages with Portly. Further ahead, he could see the training field where he had once been humiliated for not knowing how to ride a horse. But among all the unchanging sights, what struck him the most was the figure of Jaeger walking ahead of him. You used to say you hated hassle, yet you accepted the position of captain. That's not what I expected. I had no intention of taking it. If it weren't for Lady Oksana's request, I would have refused outright. Jaeger despised inconveniences, even more so those that brought additional burdens. Knowing Jaeger's personality well, Vlad found it surprising that he had accepted the role. It seemed even Jaeger had his reasons. Lady Oksana, because of you my name gained unexpected prestige. I suppose Lady Oksana wanted to capitalize on that in some way. The continent was captivated by the emergence of the new Swordmaster. Vlad, who had recreated a legendary scene by defeating the oldest dragon, was the first Swordmaster since the founder King Frosin. It made sense that the Vayezid family would want to leverage his fame. In the end, having a good disciple has helped you rise. Keep living in your little bubble of self-satisfaction. Without further response, Jaeger led him down a hallway unfamiliar to Vlad. It was a central part of the mansion Vlad had never accessed during his days as a squire. This is my first time here, and it would have been a problem if you had come here before. A squire has no business here. Jaeger chuckled mockingly, but it wasn't bothersome. Perhaps it was because he still saw Vlad as someone under his care. Go ahead, enter. Understood. The room that had once belonged to Peter now belonged to Rudiger. Jaeger knocked softly on the door, and as if they had been waiting, it opened with a low creak. Oh, a mystery protected by Ragmus that had now found peace. A place accessible only to those authorized by the leader of the Vayezid family located deep within the mansion. You're later than I expected, Vlad. Despite the unfamiliar setting, there was something familiar waiting for him, a welcoming smile. Since this morning, the crows have been circling. They said you'd be coming. A man with black hair smiled at him under the sunlight that illuminated the office filled with symbols of authority. Yet even within this formal atmosphere, the presence of Rudiger Vayezid made the space feel warm and inviting. Here it must have been an exhausting journey. Rudiger, the next leader of the Vayezid family, tossed something toward Vlad with a wide grin. You're not going to refuse this time, are you? How spiteful you are. Vlad couldn't help but smile as he caught a small peanut that Rudiger had thrown at him. Lately, I feel like each day helps me understand my own abilities a little better. Rudiger, seemingly at ease, was sitting in a relaxed manner. His legs were spread out and his long size indicated his comfort, a posture not just anyone could take in front of another. I always thought I'd be good at this, but leading a family is much harder than I imagined. So it seems. Vlad, holding a cup of tea that Dorothea had served, observed Rutiger out of the corner of his eye. His skin was paler than usual, as if he hadn't seen the sun in a long time, and the dark circles under his eyes were deep, evidence of the toll taken by the weight of his responsibilities. Although Vlad had always thought Rutiger and Joseph were dissimilar, seeing him now, he couldn't help but notice a resemblance in Rutiger's face to that of his late brother. And amidst all these challenges, you are a significant part of the problem. Me, Vlad shrugged incredulously as if he genuinely didn't understand, but Rutiger, irritated by his indifferent attitude, frowned. You have an influence that transcends any single family, yet you live in an inn. Do you know how many complaints I have to deal with because of you? This is the first time I'm hearing of it. It's the third time I've had to convince Mayor Borden not to resign. Even the Duke of Iron has offered you land. Why do you refuse to settle down? The first Swordmaster had founded an empire, but the new Swordmaster didn't even want his own territory, leaving everyone baffled. What about Mashium? It's still ownerless. It's a place I have no connection to and don't like. What if we turn a slum into an autonomous zone? There's no need, they manage fine without me. Rutiger let out a long sigh, frustrated by Vlad's firm refusals. Is it so uncomfortable for you to stay in Sora? Isn't it advantageous? Yes, it is, but that doesn't mean it doesn't cause me problems. With the fall of imperial authority, Vlad's presence in Sora had turned the city into a place of great interest. While this brought benefits, it also placed enormous pressure on Rutiger as the leader of the Vayezid family. But no matter who it is, everyone keeps pressing me. Honestly, it's a headache. However, to wield a brilliant sword, one must bear its weight. The person who stirred things up in Vlad's name while receiving no clear answers was none other than Rutiger, who was most closely tied to him. So you won't be emperor? The casually thrown question made the atmosphere in the office tense. Even Dorothea, who was serving tea, paused for a moment. Perhaps it's better to start something new for everyone. To break free from the tragedy of an era, sometimes one must destroy it entirely. Just as Kahano broke away from the Age of Dragons, Vlad now had to break away from the Age of the Empire. I see. Rutiger smiled, as if Vlad's response was exactly what he had expected. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. Rest for now, understood. When they had arrived in Sturma, it had been midday, but now the sun was beginning to paint the sky red. Oh, before you rest, there are some guests who want to see you. Understood. And if you have time, you should take a look at the new squires. They're your subordinates, you know, give them some attention. Although phrased as a request, his tone was unusually firm, almost making it seem like an obligation. Vlad could only nod reluctantly. And also, what now? Rutiger's voice stopped him, and Vlad looked at him with exasperation, but Rutiger's next words silenced him. You should visit our mother. I'm sure seeing you will make her happy. Sturma was bustling with celebrations for the upcoming festival, but the place where that woman resided remained eerily quiet. A woman who, day by day, lingered in front of a gravestone, consumed by sorrow. Remembering the smile she had always given him as a mother, Vlad slowly nodded before leaving the room in silence. When is he supposed to arrive? In a dark hallway where night had already fallen, a door opened silently. From inside the room, the faint light of a candle illuminated a shock of red hair sticking out. Zemina, timidly peeking her head through the door and glancing down the hallway, quickly shrank back, intimidated by the oppressive silence surrounding her. I'm supposed to be a lady. Is it okay to leave a lady alone like this? Vlad, who had left saying he was going to meet the new count, had yet to return. Goth, who claimed he was off to see some acquaintances, had also not come back, likely enjoying drinks somewhere. At that moment, Zemina was the only one left in the room. Those idiots, when they come back, they're going to get an earful from me. Though her words were harsh, her voice trembled slightly. In familiar Sora, she would never have felt like this. But here in the unfamiliar Sturma, the encroaching darkness filled her with unease. Hello, Kaya. As Zemina peeked into the hallway, hoping someone would finally arrive, a voice sounded beside her. It was a clear, refreshing voice, but to Zemina, already on edge, it was terrifying. I just wanted to address White. Maybe you're looking for Vlad. Kaya, a pale, unfamiliar figure floated alone in the dark hallway. Barely visible, the faint figure appeared to be a little girl who seemed utterly out of place in the mansion, making the scene even more frightening for Zemina. Should I come back later? Hiyik. The World Tree Priestess halted, seemingly confused as she watched Zemina collapse to the floor. She had rushed over excitedly, eager to meet the red-haired figure she had seen in her dreams, but it seemed her enthusiasm had been a mistake. Who are you? When Zemina finally managed to form a question, the priestess scratched her head awkwardly. Lacking a proper name, she appeared to be thinking about how to introduce herself without scaring Zemina further. I just wanted to give you this. Not skilled with words, the priestess decided to act instead. She extended a piece of paper, offering the painting she had brought with her, her apologetic expression clear. What is this? It's something I saw in a dream. Zemina, still trying to calm herself, took the sheet of paper the girl offered and tried to examine the drawing on it. But the faint moonlight streaming in through the window wasn't enough to clearly make out what was depicted. "I think Vlad will like this." To Vlad, hearing a familiar name, some color returned to Zemina's face. But by then, the World Tree Priestess had already begun retreating slowly into the hallway. "I think it's going to take a bit longer for you to smile at me." Huh. In her dreams, the priestess had seen the red-haired woman smiling warmly at her. However, during this first encounter, the distance between them was still too vast for that connection to form. "We'll meet again, Zemina." With those words, the World Tree Priestess left the painting in Zemina's hands and turned to leave. Zemina, still in a daze, remained sitting on the floor, watching as the girl's platinum blonde hair vanished into the dark hallway. 248, extra 10 in the sky, I observed. This mansion is haunted. It was early morning, a time when the sun had not yet risen and everything was shrouded in a dim twilight. Vlad, barely able to keep his eyes open, was awakened by Zemina's voice from beside him. "What? I'm telling you, this place has ghosts. I saw them last night." As his vision gradually came into focus, Zemina appeared in front of him, hands clawed like a cat, trying to convey something eerie. To Vlad, who didn't understand the context, it was just another of her peculiar antics. "What on earth did you eat?" "I knew you'd say that." Breaking into his room so early in the morning to talk about ghosts seemed absurd to Vlad, who sighed and laid back down. But Zemina pulled the blankets away with determination. "What's wrong with you this early? Look at this, I have proof." While Vlad, still groggy, tried to ignore her, Zemina waved a piece of paper in front of his face. It was the drawing the World Tree Priestess had handed her the night before. "The ghost I saw left me this drawing. What do you think? Don't you feel a chill just looking at it? Look at this messy stroke. It's obviously cursed." As Zemina claimed, the drawing was utterly chaotic. However, its vibrant colors made it hard to determine the artist's age or intent. "A ghost gave you this. I swear it did. Did this ghost have platinum blonde hair and wear a white dress?" "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Hearing Vlad describe the supposed ghost exactly, Zemina gasped, covering her mouth in astonishment. Her wide eyes grew even rounder as she stared at Vlad. "I've got goosebumps." Her large eyes, now even more rounded, seemed to confirm Vlad's accuracy. Vlad scratched his head as he began to study the drawing she had given him. As dawn broke over Sturma, the faint light filtering through the windows slowly illuminated the room. Vlad furrowed his brows as he tried to decipher the drawing's message. At the same time, the Vayezid mansion was bustling with guests, transformed into a social hub. Nobles and envoys from across the continent had gathered. For many, this rare chance to mingle was the perfect opportunity to form new connections. "Oh, Lord Vlad Oreo." Among all the guests, the one they most sought to meet was Vlad, the new Swordmaster. However, Vlad paid no attention to the countless individuals approaching him and instead strode confidently up the stairs. "You should visit our mother. I'm sure it would make her happy to see you." He passed the noise of the first and second floors, heading to the third, a quieter area close to guests. Reaching the hushed hallway, Vlad paused and glanced around. The sun shines just as brightly as ever. When he had been a squire, this hallway was always alive with the bustle of servants and activity. Now the stillness was so profound that he could hear the birds singing outside. Sniff, sniff. Before stepping further, Vlad sniffed at his clothes discreetly, checking if he smelled unpleasant. It was an old habit from his days in the slums, when he still hadn't shaken. But even in winter, when he wore heavy layers, the lady of this house had always greeted him with a warm smile. "Lord Vlad, it's a pleasure to see you again after so long." Outside Oksana's room, Vlad greeted the maid stationed there with a polite nod. She was a middle-aged woman who had come to the household from Oksana's family. "I've come to visit Lady Oksana." "Oh, of course." The maid immediately recognized Vlad and smiled warmly. "It's hard to believe how elegant you've become. Thank you." Though her smile was bright, the somber atmosphere of the room seemed to weigh even on the maid, whose tone was more subdued than usual. Perhaps after so long without laughter, she had forgotten how to truly smile. "Please wait a moment, I'll let her know you're here." Even though Vlad had announced his visit beforehand, he understood that ladies always needed time to prepare. Waiting in the reception room, he sat quietly, taking in his surroundings. They say a room reflects its owner. Although the room was spacious, the furnishings and decorations were modest. It didn't feel empty though, as warm orange sunlight filled the space. Vlad, yes. In that sunlight was someone who had always smiled at him. Seeing that smile made the damp, moldy corners of his heart feel just a little warmer. "You must be tired from your journey, Vlad." But today the smile Oksana offered him was heavy with sorrow, like a storm cloud ready to burst. "Forgive me, I should have come sooner." "It's all right, don't worry." "Come closer." Sitting on the bed, Oksana gestured for him to approach. Her outstretched hands were dry and frail like brittle twigs. She hadn't been eating well, she was ill, worn down. Like the last time Vlad had seen his own birth mother. Seeing her state, Vlad couldn't help but nervously wet his lips. "I know how busy you've been. I know you've worked hard to accomplish what my son could not." It had been 2 years since Joseph's death, but Oksana spoke of him as if it had happened just yesterday. Have you taken care of the rogue dark mages? In the north, most of them. And those who sowed discord under the blood dragon, there's a meeting in Brigantes. I plan to close the divisions there. Every era bears its burdens, and the living must endure them. A man had once said that this generation must drink the poison that had seeped across the world to cleanse it. You've done so much, Vlad. Joseph, who had sacrificed the last of his days trying to burn away that poison, had left the task to Vlad. And as Oksana watched his efforts, she gave him a faint, weary smile. It's a relief. Maybe the next generation won't have to endure what you have. Though Vlad didn't physically resemble Joseph, Oksana looked at him with the same warmth she had shown her own son. As expected, it's good to see you well fed. Those broad shoulders, you're every bit a man now. Thank you. But Vlad, sitting beside the bed, couldn't meet her gaze, because he knew that while she might have been like a mother to him, he could never truly be her son. The only one who could comfort this woman, fading a little more each day, was Joseph, who now lay beneath the gravestone visible through the window. And Vlad was all too aware of that fact. At times like this, it feels so unfair. Beneath a sky blanketed in clouds, Vlad quietly uncorked a bottle of whiskey. Behind him, the mansion bustled with the sounds of celebration, but in the small garden it seemed like another world, serene and removed from the commotion. Standing before Joseph's gravestone, Vlad poured out a portion of the liquor in silence, sighing as his gaze drifted toward the commemorative tower for fallen knights visible in the distance. It seems like those who left first have it easy. The ones left behind are the ones still carrying the weight of it all. Gregory, Ragmus Ag, and many others, knights whose names he hadn't even known, who had fought alongside him against Sarnus on that day. Vlad raised his glass of whiskey in tribute to the freshly engraved names on the tower, but then he felt the presence of someone behind him and turned his head. Still, finishing what they couldn't is the duty of those who remain. Marcus. From a spot that had seemed empty a moment ago, a man stepped forward. His face was marred with deep scars, a testament to the trials he must have endured in the past. At least the knights who rest here are fortunate. There are those in this world who vanish without even leaving their name behind. Vlad nodded silently in agreement with Marcus's words. No one is born without purpose, but that doesn't guarantee their purpose will endure to the end. The Pope Andreas wanted me to relay his gratitude. It seems the ones you dealt with this time caused him quite a bit of trouble. Did they? Over the past 2 years, Vlad had traversed the continent, stamping out the remnants of lingering threats. Sometimes he faced dark mages who manipulated others. Other times, he hunted down the last of Dragulia's followers. His relentless pursuit was his way of ensuring that the names now etched before him had not been sacrificed in vain. Is there anyone else left? Once this ceremony is over, I could head out again. But Marcus didn't answer Vlad's question about his next target. Instead, he uncorked a bottle of liquor and poured it silently onto the grass nearby. You're still young, and I think you've done more than enough. Marcus, who had been pouring out the liquor for the nameless dead like himself, raised his head and nodded toward Vlad, who now wore a puzzled expression. By the last order of Count Peter, the Ravens will no longer provide you with information. The Count wanted you to stop living for others and start living for yourself. That was his final request. There are stars that shine brightly because they have a dream, a goal they wish to achieve. But now that star was losing its light, unable to release the bonds it should have left behind. It was time to raise its gaze to a new sky. It seems we won't see each other for a while. It appears so. Then let me ask you just one thing. As Marcus turned to leave after delivering his message, Vlad stopped him with a single question. What is your real name? The nameless raven, the man who introduced himself differently each time they met. Vlad had always been curious about the true identity of this enigmatic figure. But Marcus, without looking back, simply gestured toward the commemorative tower. I don't know, I buried my old name there. A man who had laid to rest the name that defined him to meld seamlessly into the shadows. And with that, Marcus disappeared without a trace, just as he had when Vlad first met him. Looks like I'm unemployed now. Standing alone in the garden, Vlad muttered a dry reflection after Marcus's departure. Adrift and unsure of what path to follow, he pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and stared at it intently. What am I supposed to do now, Joseph? It was the drawing the World Tree Priestess had given Zemina. Vlad studied the drawing for a long time, but beside him Joseph remained silent, unable to respond. Swaa, from the overcast sky, rain finally began to fall. Looking up toward the heavens, Vlad felt the rain drench him, as if it were urging him forward, leaving a bitter weight in his heart. 249, Extra 11 Continuation. With the sunset behind him, Vlad stood alone in a wheat field, striking the frozen ground with a hoe. Going back in time a bit to the spring days, Vlad had been learning to work on Ramon's farm. This is truly a curious sight. It was an empty field, without even seeds planted, just freshly tilled earth. The only sound was that of Vlad's hoe striking the soil. Despite the persistent noise, Vlad displayed absolute clumsiness, a novice struggling with farm work. You traded your sword for a simple hoe and you still managed to look this stupid. Am I really that bad? Vlad scratched his cheek awkwardly, glancing at Ramond, who stood nearby making caustic remarks. Vlad already suspected as much. It was clear he had no aptitude for farming. No matter how hard you try, you weren't born for this. It's not about adapting or learning. You simply lack the talent. Born and raised in the city, Vlad had never been close to the earth. Even taking that into account, his natural inclination for agriculture was non-existent. Why the hell are you doing this? With a sword, Vlad was the swordmaster admired across the continent, but with a hoe, he was a fumbling beginner. To Ramond, the disparity was so stark he couldn't help but let out a deep sigh. What made you suddenly want to take up farming? A strong smell of alcohol wafted from the wineskin Ramond held. There was no need to ask what it contained, it was obvious. Are you exhausted? Want to take a break? It's not that. Vlad noticed Ramond's growing frustration. He set the hoe aside, sat down on the ground, and began to speak. I've just been thinking about what? That the only things I know how to do are steal, pickpocket, or wield a sword. Ramond flinched slightly at Vlad's words. As a child, Vlad had roamed dark alleyways, parentless and homeless. His path had been filled with cold, sharp things, a reflection of the life he had led just to survive. Isn't it a little shameful to live a life that only knows those things? Vlad felt ashamed to be someone who only knew how to harm others. Even if the world hailed him as a glorious swordmaster, he knew better. Kahano, the previous swordmaster, had not guided him solely with swordsmanship. What's so shameful about a swordmaster only knowing how to wield a sword? That's exactly the problem. Ramond's mildly chiding tone made Vlad smile faintly. I don't want to always be the swordmaster. Though the world saw him as a shining figure, to others, Vlad was something entirely different. To some, he was an irreplaceable friend. To others, a savior in desperate times. And to Ramond, at this moment, he was merely a clumsy farmer. Who knows, maybe one day someone will ask me about something other than my sword. Kahano, the swordmaster, had been more than just that. Vlad remembered most vividly the nameless voice that had guided him onto the right path. Perhaps the most valuable thing Vlad had learned from Kahano wasn't his flawless swordsmanship, but his approach to life. That's why I'm learning. So I'll have something to say if someone asks me in the future. Vlad also wanted to emulate that side of Kahano, not as an emperor or knight, but as the adult who had guided him. That's why Vlad was now trying to gather the experiences he had overlooked, broadening his understanding of the world. The succession ceremony was grand. Knights clad in gleaming armor stood in formation, and dignitaries from across the continent offered their congratulations. It was perhaps the most magnificent event ever held in the North. Observing it, Vlad felt a strange sense of euphoria he couldn't quite put into words. I've never seen so many nobles gathered in one place before. Oh yes, this is only my second time. The first was when I received my knighthood, and now this. Seeing Vlad slightly excited, Jaeger began to tense up. Vlad's behavior was a warning sign to someone who knew him well. Jaeger, recalling the trouble Vlad had caused as a squire, knew this was the time to be most vigilant. But why is Baroness Alicia seated over there? The event, meticulously planned by the Vayezid family, was drawing attention from across the continent. The seating arrangement was carefully organized by rank and title, yet Vlad couldn't help but feel curious seeing Alicia seated so close to Zemina. You seem anxious. I'm not, please try to stay calm, I've never felt better. But that wasn't true. Even his breathing carried a trace of tension. Each time the two women in front of him whispered to each other, the rapid beating of his heart seemed to echo loudly in Jaeger's ears. Now entering Lord Rudiger Vayezid. At the sound of the steward's announcement, the hall doors began to open. The doors, designed to resemble Sturma's fortified walls, were massive and imposing. As they swung open, the chatter in the hall died down into absolute silence. A tall man with broad shoulders, clad in an ornate ceremonial armor, entered with steady steps. It was Rudiger, looking far more solemn than usual. He looks different, it's natural. At the highest point of the hall, Peter Vayezid, the current head of the family, made a gesture with his hand. It was the signal to commence the succession ceremony. He's no longer the Rudiger you knew. From now on, he will be Count Vayezid. Bearing the weight of his family's name on his shoulders and the burden of their lands on his back, Rudiger could no longer be who he once was. With every step forward carrying the responsibilities of his new role, Vlad's gaze grew more complex. Please come forward, son of Vayezid. With each step Rudiger took ascending the stairs, he drew closer to Peter. At the same time, Peter Vayezid slowly rose from his seat. Holding the Lord's mantle in his left hand and the ceremonial sword in his right, Peter opened his arms as if to say, "Come." His gaze remained fixed on his son as he ascended toward him. When Rudiger reached the highest point, Peter, holding both the mantle and sword, extended them toward him. Wear this mantle. Finally, Rudiger reached the pinnacle of Vayezid, and in front of him, Peter carefully draped the mantle over his shoulders. This mantle symbolizes duty. Do not forget that you now bear the responsibility for countless lives who depend on you. A lord is not just someone who rules over land, but one who protects their people. That immense responsibility now weighed heavily on Rudiger's shoulders. Raise your sword. Solemnly, Rudiger reached for the object Peter offered him, the sword of the Vayezid family. The sword, passed down through generations, was a reminder that Rudiger must now wield it not for his personal honor, but for that of his family. This sword symbolizes your responsibility as the head of the family. From this moment on, you will not wield this blade for your own honor, but for the honor of the Vayezid name. He was no longer merely Rudiger the knight. From this moment, he would live as the heir and representative of the Vayezid family. As the ceremony concluded, Peter Vayezid addressed those gathered with a powerful voice. I, Peter Vayezid, declare before all present that Rudiger Vayezid is the new head of the family. Having handed over everything he needed to, Peter raised his voice, addressing the hall filled with guests. Rudiger Vayezid has assumed the title of head of the family. Until then, the only sound in the vast hall had been Peter's voice speaking to his son. But as soon as he finished, thunderous applause erupted, threatening to shake the very walls. Clap, 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 clap. The cheers and applause of those present filled the space, showing no sign of abating anytime soon. It was a sound of celebration, a tribute to the Vayezid dynasty, which had endured even in the darkest times when the mightiest and oldest dragon had brought chaos. Yet amid the deafening ovation, Vlad caught a faint voice that seemed to come from above. You've done well. It was a barely audible whisper, perceptible only to someone like Vlad, whose dragon blood granted him acute senses. The voice came from Peter, who embraced his son with a blend of solemnity and warmth. Truly, you've done well to make it this far. Having relinquished the mantle of leadership and the family sword, Peter was no longer a leader but fully a father. As he held Rudiger close, he whispered with genuine affection, "Thank you for all your effort to reach this place." That was truly a moving spectacle. The night following the succession ceremony, an elegant banquet was being held at the Vayezid mansion. However, while the guests laughed and mingled, Vlad walked through a dark, empty hallway far removed from the nobles and their revelry. What does it feel like to inherit something? I can't even imagine. He was accompanied by Jaeger, who walked ahead of him. Both carried bottles of liquor in their hands as they made their way to what had once been Joseph's office. Well, I suppose inheriting something from Dragulia would have been impressive. Too bad you missed out on that. That's not what I mean. Jaeger's sudden mention of Dragulia caused Vlad's expression to stiffen awkwardly. I mean something like what a father passes down to his son. It was difficult to put into words, and Vlad gestured clumsily in an attempt to explain. Jaeger, however, didn't even glance back. That's not something everyone gets to experience, even if their parents are alive. In this world, if you don't inherit debts, you're already lucky. Really. And if you want to know how it feels, just make sure someone inherits something from you. Creak, the door handle emitted a harsh, grating sound as it turned, rusty from years of disuse. You can't inherit something, but you can leave something behind for others to inherit. Kriak, though he expected the office to be shrouded in darkness, the room was bathed in the soft, bluish glow of moonlight. Yet despite the light, the space felt entirely different from how Vlad remembered it. Nothing here has changed. Nothing has changed, you say, but all the furniture is covered with cloth. The office, now devoid of its owner, had become a cold, dust-laden space. However, with these two unexpected visitors, the room seemed to regain a faint warmth from the past. Are we going to drink here? Yes, originally I planned to do it alone. Though it wasn't planned, Vlad and Jaeger naturally took up the positions they used to occupy. Vlad sat across from the guest table, and Jaeger stood by Joseph's desk, just as he always had. Jaeger couldn't help but chuckle watching Vlad behave as if it were the old days. A boy who didn't even know how to ride a horse. It's because I didn't know I was a dragon, a brat who only knew how to brawl with the other squires and get into trouble. Well, that was because. Reminiscing about the past, Jaeger shook his head in amusement while Vlad fumbled to justify himself. Perhaps because he had known Vlad since he was a boy, Jaeger still found it hard to believe how much he had grown. From that troublesome kid to becoming a swordmaster, and yet you still have so much to envy. Here, take this, liquor, it's expensive. Over 50 years old. The bottle Jaeger handed to Vlad was one he had been saving for years. It was a special bottle that had belonged to his father, back when Jaeger had first come to Vayezid from the Oscar family. Are you sure it's all right to give me something so valuable? You said you wanted to inherit something, didn't you? Even so, enough already, just open the bottle. Jaeger pulled a cloth off a piece of furniture and retrieved some glasses, holding them out to Vlad. It was a clear invitation to pour the liquor, but Vlad, with a sly smile, tucked the bottle behind his back. This liquor is too valuable to drink right now. Then give the bottle back. How about we start with the one I brought? I've been waiting 20 years to drink that. Jaeger sighed in defeat as Vlad poured a different liquor he had brought along. By the way, Jaeger, do you know how to fish? Fish? Why are you asking that out of nowhere? I thought it might be nice to learn. Jaeger, gazing at the moonlight streaming through the window, let out a small sigh. If you want to learn something basic, come back in winter. Vlad smiled as he watched Jaeger's back. He had spoken about inheritance, but what he truly desired was to continue the connections forged in his life. 250. Extra 12, the child and the woman. The red carpet that adorned the hallways had been removed. Only a few withered flower petals remained on the decorations, along with an empty pitcher. The Vayezid mansion, which had been the setting for a splendid celebration, was now calm. The guests had left, and the only thing breaking the silence was the singing of the birds. Vlad walked alone through that tranquil space. He wore a light cloak as if he were already prepared to leave. Early that morning, as the bluish colors of dawn stretched across the sky, Vlad made his way to the room where the lady of the house, Oksana Vayezid, was. "Are you feeling better?" Though the sun had yet to rise, Oksana was already awake. Or perhaps, due to her persistent cough, she hadn't been able to sleep all night. Nevertheless, she greeted Vlad with the same warm smile as always. "Are you leaving already?" Although she could have remained lying down, Oksana made an effort to sit up with the help of a few cushions. She didn't want Vlad, who was about to leave, to worry unnecessarily. "Yes. I think it's time to return." However, she couldn't entirely hide the illness that afflicted her. Oksana's lips, pale as if covered in wax, left Vlad with a strained smile. "That's the right choice. If you're going to leave, it's best to do it early. You know how unpredictable the northern weather is." The rays of the morning sun began to filter through the window, bathing Oksana's bed in a warm orange glow, similar to the one Vlad had seen the day he met her. Under that light, Oksana's figure resembled a painting. It wasn't ostentatious or dazzling, but it offered the serenity of a picture one would want to gaze upon every day. "It looks like the sun is rising. You'd better hurry." That painting, which he had always wanted to keep, was now telling him it was time to leave. Oksana caressed the small package she had placed beside her bed. "Are you wearing clothes suited for the season now?" Vlad had been a child who wore winter clothes even in the height of summer, huddled up as if he still felt cold beneath the warm summer breezes. The clothes that aren't seen are the most important. True elegance is shown in the least visible details. Inside the package that Oksana held, there were surely undergarments and socks for Vlad. A seemingly trivial gift, but one that only a mother could prepare with such attention to detail. "That girl is very pretty. What was her name?" "Zemina. When you were together, you looked very good." "Thank you." They had already said everything they needed to say. It was time to go. Oksana nodded silently to her last guest, but Vlad still couldn't take the first step toward the door. "I plan to come back in winter." "Huh." He turned back toward Oksana, speaking somewhat awkwardly, as if it were difficult to reopen a closed conversation. "I want to learn how to fish. I've heard that ice fishing can only be done in winter." Fishing, though the topic had nothing to do with what they had just been discussing, Vlad was trying to keep it going. Because he wanted to see Oksana move, smile. Because he knew he would miss her more if she remained still, like a lifeless painting. It's something that, if one had a father, they would learn naturally. "I don't know anything about those things, so lately I've been trying to learn. Last time Lord Raman taught me how to farm the land, and well, Vlad's world was diverse. The boy who once dreamed of becoming the perfect dragon now sought to become a star that radiated light. A young man who didn't want to be defined solely by a title. Even so, there are many things I don't understand. To some, he was the dragon born of perfection. To others, the master swordsman who wielded a brilliant blade, but before Oksana, he was just an uncertain child without answers. And that child with a shy gaze now looked at Oksana. "So, if I have more questions, can I come to ask you?" Vlad held the package against his chest, shrinking slightly without looking out of place at all. At least not to Oksana. A child who had grown up wild, like an orchid left uncared for. Looking at him, Oksana, whose world was painted in muted tones, felt a faint hint of color. Of course, a child without a mother and a mother who had lost her son looked at each other. Though the broken pieces of their hearts didn't fit perfectly, together they could withstand the blowing wind. "Come back whenever you want. I'll be waiting for you." At those words, the young man before her began to smile. He no longer wore the old winter coat he once had, but the summer clothes Oksana had given him. "Thank you for staying until the end." Although it was the host's duty to see off the guests, reaching the main door was unusual. However, behind Vlad, who was about to leave, stood Rudiger, now the head of the Vayezid family, and his knights, all ready to bid him farewell. "Thanks to you, my succession ceremony was splendid. It will likely go down as the most magnificent in our family's history." "Thank you for saying that." Behind Rudiger, some of Vlad's familiar knights waved to him. Cade Maxim and those who had fought alongside him against the Deathsworm and Lindworm. "So you're returning to Sora, that's right. And what will you do afterward? Will you let yourself get dragged from place to place again like before?" Prestige always demands a price. And that price was something that Vlad, as a master swordsman, had to pay. But now Vlad shook his head in silent denial in response to Rudiger's question. "No, this time I plan to rest a bit." With those words, Vlad looked at the carriage beside him. Inside, Zemina was quietly hiding, afraid someone might speak to her. I suppose it's time for you to take a break. Rudiger smiled broadly, understanding perfectly what Vlad was saying. I think it's better if I leave now. Yes, go. Rudiger nodded as he watched Vlad mount Noir's back with a brief salute. The squire of the Master of the Sword, who shrugged his shoulders while bidding farewell to the knights, pulled the reins, and soon the gates of Sturma began to open. Today, the weather is beautiful. As the gates opened, Rudiger watched the morning light fill the horizon. Vlad's shadow followed the rising east toward the green meadows. Come back whenever you want, Vlad. You will always be welcome as Vayezid's greatest dragon slayer. Though he didn't say it to be heard, Vlad raised a hand in farewell. He didn't look back, but in that gesture one could feel both gratitude and the promise of return. From Sturma to Sora, the carriage headed toward Sora, leaving Sturma behind. As it traversed the summer meadows, the sunset began to color the horizon around them. Captain, it looks like we'll have to camp outdoors. That's fine. Crossing the vast northern plains in a single day to reach a village was an impossible task. That's why both Vlad and Zemina nodded at Goth's words, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The sun sets quickly on the prairie. It seems to get dark faster than in Sora, Zemina said as she gathered some nearby dry branches. The stars will come out soon. In the narrow alleys of Sora, the modest buildings always blocked the sky. The glow of the lamps meant to attract customers devoured the stars, and the night sky always appeared fragmented and weak. Finding stars in that broken sky was a difficult task. Wow. But now, the night sky of the prairie stretched out before Zemina's eyes, filled with so many twinkling stars that it was hard to believe they had always been there. Fascinated by their radiance, she couldn't bring herself to lower her gaze. Zemina, come here for a moment. Lost in her own world, Zemina turned her head when she heard Vlad's voice. Why? The campfire that Goth had lit crackled softly. Following the sound, Zemina saw Vlad holding Noir's reins. He wants to say goodbye. Noir wants to say goodbye before he leaves. He was a black horse that blended perfectly with the starry sky that night. So much so that it seemed he might dissolve into the distant stars as he approached Zemina. Say goodbye, what does that mean? Zemina asked as she stroked Noir, who was nuzzling her gently, but Vlad didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward a distant hill. It means it's time for Noir to return. On the hill illuminated by the stars, a herd of wild horses could be seen as if they were waiting for his return. You're letting him go. Just like that, now is the right time. Zemina felt confused by the sudden farewell, but Vlad, without hesitation, began to remove Noir's harness. He took off the saddle, the bridle around his face, and unloaded the luggage he had been carrying. Thank you for everything. And so Vlad said goodbye to the child of the prairies, who had now returned to his original form. Are you done saying goodbye? Yes. Then go now. At the edge of the world where their paths had briefly intersected, they had extended a little further. However, Noir's world was on the prairie while Vlad's was in the city. It was time to part ways. Don't look back. Noir seemed to want to turn around again and again, but Vlad just crossed his arms and watched him. Goodbyes are better when they are simple. Seeing Vlad apply that philosophy, Noir neighed softly as if bidding farewell. There he goes. At first, his steps were hesitant, but the closer he got to the hill, the longer his strides became. Watching the black horse run toward the starry sky, Zemina began to shed tears. Is it because he resembles his owner? He doesn't look back even once. Feeling the emptiness of the farewell, Zemina instinctively moved closer to Vlad. Don't be so sad. Together, they watched Noir disappear into the distance. The image of the two of them, side by side, was identical to that of the children who used to stand in front of the smithy. It's not like we'll be apart forever. Vlad took a piece of paper from his coat as he watched Noir leave. It was the drawing the priestess of the world tree had given them, one that Zemina immediately recognized. Now that I look at it, this sunflower, its color resembles your hair. Really? In the childish drawing, there was a blonde man and a red-haired girl. Between them was a small, smiling flower. Why would someone draw a smiling face on that flower? Thank you, Zemina. Vlad wrapped an arm around Zemina's shoulders as if the night wind felt cold. Surprised by the sudden gesture, Zemina looked at him, but Vlad continued watching the sky where Noir had vanished. Just like that time when he looked at the undecorated sword hanging in the smithy. For believing in me back then. The winter in which he was born, the spring in which he said goodbye, and now the summer in which he awaited new encounters. The journey of that boy began with the sword the red-haired girl had given him. Let's go back to Sora together. Their feet were still in the mud, but they gazed at the stars together. Now they looked at each other as a shooting star streaked across the prairie sky. Even if we are not in the highest sky, even if we fall to a place where no one sees us, if we wish to shine, we can recognize each other. Because we are stars, because we can all shine like stars. So until we meet again, goodbye, star-embracing Swordmaster complete, early in the morning when everyone was deeply asleep. In the depths of the night, when even the stars in the sky were slumbering under that night sky, a voice tried to wake a man who slept without a care in the world. Sir, sir. It was the voice of a child, a young voice that had not yet reached puberty. For that reason, it didn't have enough strength to wake the man from his deep sleep. Ow, that hurt, I said, wake up. Was this what a bee sting felt like? A sharp pain jolted the man awake, and with his eyes still unfocused, he looked around. What's going on? What's happening? Shhh. The child motioned for him to be quiet and glanced outside the stable, holding a small frog in his hands. I've been looking everywhere for you. Why are you sleeping in a stable when there are decent rooms? This is a stable. The man, having no idea where he had been sleeping, looked utterly confused. If not for his good looks, his expression would have been sigh-worthy. That's why it felt so comfortable. Unlike the worried child, the still drowsy man began to gather the straw around him to lie down again, hunching his shoulders as if he were cold. Even the frog in the child's hands puffed out its cheeks as if it couldn't believe what it was seeing. This is no time for sleeping, we have to escape right now. What are you saying? Can't we talk about this later? The smell of alcohol still lingered around him as he lay down again. Frustrated, the child pounded his chest desperately, but soon held his breath upon noticing the commotion around them. We know you're hiding here, come out now. The voices were clearly aggressive, and the sound of doors being kicked down signaled their determination to find someone. Unlike the child, the man only blinked, confused by the hostile tone. Kahano Frossen, you damned libertine. The smell of oil-soaked torches filled the air, and the furious barking of hunting dogs echoed around them. But what truly confused the man was hearing the word libertine alongside his name. Crash. Finally understanding the gravity of the situation, the man hurriedly stood up, but it was already too late to prepare. There you are, a bald man with a malicious grin and yellow teeth found him just as he was getting up and adjusting his clothes. I found you, Kahano Frossen. The man, still bewildered, looked wide-eyed, while the child at his side seemed on the verge of tears. Even the frog with the hat let out a resigned sigh. May I ask why you're looking for me? This is a story from long ago, a story that is neither legendary nor grand. Yet this story, the beginning of it all, started here in the stable of a nameless, signless in 251, Extra 13, the bastard of the Frossen family. Part 1. In a cell within a mansion surrounded by somber gray bricks, on the damp floor of that place, Kahano was sitting, tied up with ropes, his gaze vacant. Keiki Hano, sir. Yes, the treatment he had received while being dragged there had been rough enough that his appearance was disheveled. But that disheveled appearance was preferable compared to the situation of the boy who called to him with a weak voice. But why am I the only one hanging upside down? Well, that's because it's a tradition of the Turek family, isn't it? Then why are you perfectly fine? That's because I'm a noble. The boy was wrapped in ropes as if he were a cocoon. Even so, despite the boy's voice, Kahano only stared at the ground in worry, biting his nails. See, could you at least lift me up for a moment? The blood is rushing to my head. Oh no, this is a problem. This time I don't think I'll get out of this unscathed. Just for a moment, really, I'm going to faint. If my brothers find out about this, I doubt they'll let me die peacefully. Sir Kahano. Sir Kahano. Despite the boy's desperate calls, Kahano did not raise his head easily. In fact, his anxiety was so intense that he was now standing, pacing back and forth. Old man, don't you have a solution? You're a mage, right? Although there were only 2 people in the cell, Kahano began to speak as if there were someone else there. Haven't you recharged yet? If you have, let's break the cell wall and get out of here. He spoke toward an empty corner of the cell. He seemed to be completely out of his mind, but fortunately there was a voice that responded to Kahano. Tisk, that's why knights are such a problem. Do you think magic is as easy to use as drawing a sword? An old voice emerged from the empty corner of the cell. Along with it, a small figure leapt out from the shadows with tiny hops. Why the hell did you get involved with the Baron's daughter? I told you not to do it. It was a frog smaller than the palm of a child's hand. Green on its back and white on its belly, it wore a tiny wizard's hat and hopped toward them while clicking its tongue. No wonder they say the Frossen lose their heads over women. This is really unfair. It was a mutual agreement. Could either of you please lower me down? A tall man with brown hair, a freckled boy tied up with ropes begging to be lowered, and a small frog with a wizard's hat and a pipe in its mouth. In any case, we need to get out of here before my brothers find out. Sir Keiki Hano, hurry up and recharge. Let's get out of here with a boom. What's that boom? That thing you showed me last time, that swoosh followed by a slash. Sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about. You're definitely a Frossen, explaining everything so badly. Though there were 3 in the cell, none seemed to understand the others. Each one said whatever came to mind. However, the boy, seeing this absurd situation, finally couldn't hold back and shouted with all his strength. They're here, I don't know who, but someone's here. Hearing the boy's screams, Kahano finally turned around. And there, outside the bars, stood a man he didn't recognize, looking at him with a stern expression as he slowly removed his hood. Brother, the man was tall, with his hair slicked back and glistening from the oil he wore. He was the epitome of noble elegance, but what stood out the most was his sharp, penetrating gaze. Damn libertine! It was the fifth son of the Frossen family, Perez Frossen. Now, with his left eye narrowed, he looked at his younger brother, known as the greatest libertine in the family's history. Brother, brother, don't use that. I can explain everything. With one eye closed, he saw his own world. With the other, he saw the world where he stood, a skill available only to knights who had reached a high level. Don't bother explaining. Just prepare to die. There's no need to use aura. Don't you feel sorry for your little brother who can't even use aura? I feel more sorry for myself for having a brother like you. Creak. Perez turned the key handed to him by the jailer and slowly opened the cell door. Perez's presence filled the space, making Kahano prepare nervously, but Perez Frossen only looked coldly at his brother's desperate attempts. Should I leave you half dead first? Crash. Before he finished smiling, a deafening sound shook the entire cell as if a wall were collapsing. The man's scream echoed alongside the crash. Even the jailers froze, confused by the dust falling from the ceiling, but they remembered their orders and held their positions. Gentlemen, are you really going to leave me hanging here? The cell trembled with each of Perez's blows. The boy, dangling like a cocoon, flailed wildly. But in the middle of all that, no one had the time to respond to his plea. Ugh, if you took rice cakes and threw them, would they look like this? Kahano, hunched and stuck to the floor of the cell, looked exactly like that. Perez, seeing him, exhaled a sigh of resignation. Remember what our father told you when you left. Chiik, the match struck by Perez, produced a flame that lit his cigarette, and the scent of tobacco began to spread through the air. He told you to keep quiet, to stay as unnoticed as possible. As he inhaled deeply, the tip of the cigarette glowed red. In the dark cell, it was the only light visible in the deep night. You're 20 years old now. You should understand why our father sent you away from the family. I don't know, damn it. Perez frowned slightly at seeing his younger brother still lying on the floor, unmoving from resentment, but he understood his defiance. For as cold as he seemed, even he could imagine how his brother felt crashing into an impossible wall. I understand you want to vent, but don't forget that the Dragulia family's anger hasn't subsided. At the mention of Dragulia, Kahano began to stir slightly. But Perez pretended not to notice and continued speaking. So go farther away until they forget you. Thud. With those words, Perez stood up and tossed a small bag toward Kahano, who was still lying on the floor. The bag fell with a familiar clinking sound. It was unmistakably the sound of coins. I don't need this. Take it, it's from our mother. After throwing the bag of gold, Perez tucked a small piece of paper into the ropes binding the boy hanging from the ceiling. Agreement or not, you caused trouble for the Turek family, so handle this. The boy, exhausted, had fallen asleep and didn't even wake when Perez untied him and gently laid him on the floor. Without another word, Perez left the cell. Kahano, still lying powerless on the floor, slowly began to rise as he watched his brother's back disappear. It must be difficult for you, Sir Perez Frossen. Perez, who had planned to leave silently, was stopped by an unexpected voice. Clearly, as a member of the Frossen family, the problems he causes are of great magnitude. The man's bald head gleamed under the moonlight. Smiling maliciously, the man approached. He was the knight of the Turek family who had brought Kahano here. What do you want? Nothing in particular. There is just an outstanding debt with Senor Kahano. Feigning politeness, the man extended his hand toward Perez. As I said before, it must be the Frossen blood that makes the problems they cause so large. Your brother owes me a considerable amount of money. Upon hearing this, Perez's brow furrowed slightly. How much? About 20 gold coins. 20 gold coins. His brother's reputation as the libertine of the Frossen family was well known. But Perez, who had watched him for a long time, knew that Kahano would not borrow 20 gold coins without a good reason. Well, the boy who accompanies your brother, right? His name is Yan. The man was embellishing his story, but the situation was simple. There was a boy who worked alone on a farm. His parents had left him with a huge debt before they died. And coincidentally, the owner of the farm was the creditor of that debt. It was a situation that, by coincidence or not, often occurred in this world. So my brother paid 20 gold coins to buy the boy's freedom. Exactly. And I lent him that money. Perez smiled slightly, understanding why there was a boy hanging in the cell. He calmly approached the man. Then the 20 gold coins must be paid. The Frossen family always paid their debts justly. Rewarding kindness and repaying grudges was an unbreakable rule of their family. Sir Perez, however, instead of handing over coins, Perez grabbed the man's outstretched hand. He squeezed it so tightly that the bald knight's eyes widened, unable to utter a sound. From what I saw on the way here, it seems you treated my younger brother quite harshly. Instead of coins, the man now felt the crushing grip of Perez on his hand. The bald knight's eyes were wide open, unable to scream, while Perez's grip threatened to crush his bones. Let's see how much your life is worth. Ugh. Even though Kahano was considered a libertine, he was still a Frossen. Not even the Turek family could touch a family that shone among humans, even in the world of dragons. Surely it's worth more than 20 gold coins. To defend the honor of his younger brother, whom no one acknowledged, Perez squeezed the man's hand forcefully. Meanwhile, his younger brother had been beaten mercilessly. Consugra. Even in the dark cell, the moon shone brightly that night. On the white paper illuminated by the moonlight, the name of a city was written. A city at the edge of Baron Turek's territory. Consugra. From Kahano's cracked lips, the name of his next destination slipped out softly. 252 extra 14, the bastard of the Frossen family. Part 2. Consugra, an ordinary town within the Baron of Turek's territory. However, although it was a commonplace, even this town had a special landscape, windmills lined up on top of a hill. On the hill where spring had arrived, sheep wandered around grazing, spreading out like white clouds. Additionally, flowers of various colors were beginning to bloom. Seen from afar, it was a peaceful scene, as though it were part of a painting. But on the face of the young woman standing there was only an expression of displeasure. Why has the wind been so strong lately? The fact that there were windmills in the town meant that it was a windy area. However, compared to previous years, the wind was so sharp that the young woman had to hold her hat tightly so it wouldn't blow away. After the strong wind subsided and Consugra calmed down again, the young woman opened her eyes and stared intently at one of the windmills, as if she had discovered something. What is that? There was a flickering light like a candle glowing faintly from a small window in the tall windmill. A light that seemed to be calling for attention with its intermittent flashes. But by the time the girl noticed that light, the strong wind was once again whipping the hill. Is this supposed to be a path for walking? A group of travelers was making their way along a trail that wound through the forest. They were holding the reins of an old horse and a small donkey, struggling to move forward. One of them was Kahano Frossen. His face covered with bruises, as if he had been beaten. Kahano struggled to pull his horse out of the mud it was stuck in. Honestly, I don't get it. How is it possible to charge a toll for something that doesn't even look like a road? Perhaps because it was spring, the wind carried a warm scent. But on the other hand, that same weather had turned the path into pure mud. In other words, it was a difficult road for any traveler. Damn dragons, they only care about their own matters up there and never bother to check these things. Sir Kahano, what if someone hears you? Alarmed by Kahano's words, Yan looked around nervously. In my town in the past, someone was arrested for saying things like that. It's true, Yan waved his hands, visibly scared while Kahano frowned. Indeed, that was how this world worked. Even if they were on a lonely forest path, it wasn't wise to speak ill of the dragons. In this era ruled by them, survival meant submitting and continuing to pull the reins, step by step. All I'm saying is that it would be great if the roads were well built. If it were up to me, I'd build great roads from the capital going north, south, east, and west. The dragons ruled this perfect world. Complaining meant rebelling against them. However, for a young man like Kahano, imagining a better future was inevitable. Idiot, saying nonsense like that is why you got kicked out of the family. But imagining a better future was a right reserved only for the dragons. So Kahano's dreams were nothing more than an unrealizable fantasy. If you still have the energy to talk nonsense, focus on getting to the town. Young people these days. Tusk, tusk, the frog sitting on Yan's head waved a paw as it spoke. Kahano sighed deeply. His dreams were big, but his reality was being stuck in the mud, pulling the reins of an old horse. If he didn't want to sink like the animal, he would have to adapt to the world the dragons had created. Well, at least the scenery isn't bad. As they climbed the hill with effort, a green open meadow of Consugra stretched out before them. A wave of green that seemed to soothe Kahano's burning chest. He took a deep breath as he admired the view. Name, Kahano, age 20. Why have you come here? Although it seemed like an insignificant town, the strict attitude of the guards watching over it was quite irritating. It says right there, I've been sent by your feudal lord, don't you see? Even after showing them the order with the lord's seal, the guard's attitude didn't change. Kahano's frustration grew as he found no solution. They say there's been a witch around here lately. I've come to capture her. Although his appearance covered in mud didn't inspire much confidence, the feudal lord's order was authentic. Moreover, since he had a squire with him, he fulfilled the appearance of a knight. There was no reason to hold him any longer, though the frog he carried as a pet aroused suspicion. Welcome to Consugra, Sir Kahano. So, can I go in now, gentlemen? Yes, go ahead. When the spear blocking his way was lifted, the palisade granting access to Consugra appeared. However, as he was about to enter, a voice from the guards made him stop. Once inside the town, please report immediately to the tax collector. The tax collector, isn't that usually the mayor? In small towns like this, it was usually the mayor who handled everything. The presence of a tax collector sent directly by the lord piqued Kahano's curiosity. Yes, and if possible, please maintain discretion. Well, what an expensive town. Hard to enter and complicated to move around in. With an enigmatic smile, Kahano turned toward the guards. It really seems like there's a witch here, doesn't it? Witch. Unlike mages who used magic through mysteries, witches performed all sorts of illicit acts by dark means. The possibility that one was here sparked a glimmer of interest on Kahano's face. "Kahano, sir, this is not the right way." Yan's voice sounded desperate from behind, but he didn't dare stop him. "The guard said we should go directly to the tax collector." "I know," because the place they were standing in front of was not the tax collector's office but inexplicably a tavern. Yan could only hop anxiously while Kahano, with complete ease, entered the place. "Yan, don't you know, before meeting someone important, it's good manners to shake off the dust and freshen up with a bit of liquor." "Really? What other choice do you have?" "Just follow me." Although Yan frowned in doubt, Kahano had already opened the tavern door and entered. Not bad. It was the typical tavern of a small town. The ground floor served food and drinks, and the upper floor functioned as an inn. The smell of food was enough for Kahano to decide that it wasn't a bad place. "I'd like to order something." "What's the most popular thing here?" "We only sell one thing." "Then bring me that and a beer." "Kahano, sir, better make it 2 of those and a beer." After placing the order with the tavern owner, Kahano looked around and spoke to Yan. "There are a lot of people." "Yes, it seems the food is really good. In the tavern in our village, there was never this many people." For a large city this was normal, but this was a small town on the outskirts of the territory. It was odd that so many people were gathered in the tavern. How good can it be for them to leave their work and come here? He estimated there were about 30 people, all men of working age. "Here you go." "Oh, that was quick. The stew is always ready." The stew came out shortly after ordering. It was a thick mixture of meat and vegetables. Yan, seeing the hot food, smiled from ear to ear. "Thank you, Sir Kahano." "Yes, eat up. This will be added to the 20 gold you owe." "Understood." Yan hung his head dejected while Kahano took a spoonful of stew to his mouth. It's good." The stew, cooked for a long time, had a thick and comforting flavor typical of rural towns. "But I don't think it's so good that people would crowd in like this." It wasn't delicious enough to abandon work and pack the tavern. "On my farm, the sheep were torn apart. At first, I didn't even know what it was. At night, the children get so scared they have fits. This is the work of a witch." "What else could it be?" Kahano chewed slowly as he listened to the conversations in the tavern. He had gone there on purpose to hear the town's rumors before carrying out the feudal lord's mission. What an honor to have such a distinguished person in such a humble place. In the city of Anares, near Consugra, tension filled the mayor's office as the sun set. "If you had informed us, we would have come to greet you." The mayor bowed deeply with a pathetic expression. He could barely breathe from the effort of holding in his belly. "I received the report from the mages. They say the investigation is about to conclude." "That's right, they told me so themselves." The mayor, ignoring his shortness of breath, rubbed his hands as he spoke to the man before him. "I made sure to assist them in everything and gave them the best possible treatment. I did everything I could to contribute to their goal." In a way, he seemed servile. It wasn't a look befitting a mayor responsible for a city. But the reason he did his utmost to bow his head was because the man in front of him was naturally in a position to demand it. "Good work." The man's golden hair gleamed in the light of the setting sun. Even in twilight, his hair maintained its golden luster. "If this succeeds, I will remember your name." The man's eyes, a cold blue, reflected pure perfection. The mayor bowed even deeper. Thank you, Lord Sarnus." Sarnus Dragulia, a young dragon who was beginning to stand out in his family. He smiled as he looked at the mayor bowed before him. 253. Extra 15. The Suspicious Town. Part 1. The child's round cheeks were adorable. His eyes moved from side to side following the movements of Kahano's hand. Even Kahano, who was trying to attract the boy's attention by waving a candy, couldn't help but laugh at that innocent expression. "So you say that lately you've been hearing strange noises at night?" "Yes. Noises that the adults can't hear but you and your friends can." The boy's eyes remained fixed on the candy Kahano was holding, but his outstretched fingers pointed toward the hill. With his arm extended, he indicated the windmills that stood on the town's hill. "That windmill, someone cries from there." "Cries?" "Yes, cries. The windmill cries every night." When the boy said that the windmills cried, Yan, standing beside him, began tilting his head as if he couldn't understand. However, Kahano's eyes remained calm and serious. "I've told you everything. Can I have the candy now?" After finishing his story, the boy held out both hands toward Kahano as if asking for a reward. Moved by the endearing gesture, Kahano gave him the candy. The boy smiled broadly upon seeing the sweet in his hand while Kahano slowly stood up. A windmill that cries. The rumor that a windmill cried at night. Only the children had heard it, so the adults dismissed it as nonsense. But now Kahano's eyes reflected a different kind of seriousness. 5 children have said the same thing. It was strange for 5 children to give the exact same testimony. Even coming from children, hearing the same account 5 times deserved to be taken seriously. And that mage told me not to go near the windmill. Yesterday, the grim-looking mage had warned him not to go near the windmill. It wasn't clear whether it was a warning or a threat. Recalling that moment, Kahano chewed the last candy with a thoughtful expression. In any case, I would prefer you not to go near the windmill. For a quiet town, the mayor's house was surprisingly luxurious. Building a house of that size could only mean the mayor had a good reputation or had embezzled a lot of money. Investigating the witch is fine, but it would be better to avoid that place. However, the one receiving him wasn't the mayor, but a completely different man. A middle-aged man in an embroidered robe with a stern expression. His refined demeanor and expensive robe made it clear that he was a mage. I am conducting experiments that require a certain degree of privacy. I hope you understand. His tone reflected a distinguished education, and with that robe that looked so expensive, no one would doubt his position. If it weren't for his feet on the table, Kahano would have thought he was a respectable person. Well, as long as you let me investigate without interference, I don't mind. Although the man's behavior was disrespectful, the tax collector beside him seemed too nervous to say anything. The man who had introduced himself as Samont acted as if the place belonged to him. It's an experiment supervised directly by the Dragulia family. It can't be helped. A very understanding young man. No matter how disrespectful Samont was, the name Dragulia demanded respect. Even if he wasn't a dragon, no one dared challenge someone who represented that family. I wonder what kind of experiment is being conducted in this small town, but that's all I need to cooperate with. Yes. However, the man now standing in front of Samont was the infamous bastard of the Frossen family. Perhaps if he had been careful with his actions until now, the word bastard wouldn't have been attached to Kahano's name. It's curious, isn't it, that in a town supervised by the Dragulia family, a witch appears, something so rare to see. If this is all just a coincidence, it would truly be something curious. Kahano was smiling, but his eyes showed no joy. Samont maintained his serious expression. The tension between them made Yan feel suffocated. I think I shouldn't have followed Kahano. On the way back to the inn from the mayor's house, Yan was pulling a small donkey while speaking with a worried voice. When I end up being marked too, after all, he's someone from the Dragulia family. Yan seemed quite nervous about what had happened recently. For a boy who had lived his whole life in a rural village, what he had seen was something completely out of the ordinary. Yes, the Dragulia family. But why would the Dragulia family use an expelled mage? However, Kahano, walking ahead, didn't seem to hear Yan's voice. He was lost in his own thoughts. And besides, a mage from a fallen family in the south, were they that desperate for someone? Kahano, what are you saying now? Kahano's tone was unusual, murmuring non-stop as if trapped in another world. Yan found his behavior strange. He had never seen Kahano like this. From the south and from a fallen family, what does all that mean? What? I mean what you just mentioned. You said something about someone being expelled. Kahano, who was absorbed in his thoughts, seemed to snap back to reality when he saw Yan's wide eyes. His expression finally regained some vitality. It was Samont who was expelled. Yan was visibly confused by Kahano's unexpected words. That guy was expelled. Did someone mention that before? Does it need to be said? Just looking at him you can tell. Yan was perplexed. How could Kahano gather all that information just by looking? That Samont was from the south, from a fallen family, and expelled seemed impossible to deduce without being told. I don't understand anything you're saying, Kahano. You saw it too, the robe Samont was wearing. What about his robe? Yan still didn't understand, which made Kahano frown, as if wondering why he couldn't see something so obvious. It had elaborate embroidery. Those patterns are typical of the south. Also, did you see his shiny boots? That means they were treated to be waterproof. Only people from the swampy regions of the south care that much about their boots. Oh, although they had been in the same place and seen the same person, the information they gathered was very different. That was the difference made by Kahano's sharp powers of observation. So, it seems he's from the south, but what does it mean that he's from a fallen family? He was wearing a ring with a noble family seal. But the emblem was unknown to me, so it must be from a family that fell at least a generation ago. Yan was amazed. When had Kahano found time to notice the ring during that brief meeting? Yan only remembered cowering before Samont's intimidating presence. And besides, his clothes were worn. It looks like he takes care of his clothing carefully, but even so, it was worn out. That means he doesn't have much money. Then why do you say he's an expelled mage? Each of Kahano's deductions seemed to fit perfectly, and Yan's eyes shone with admiration. Now he was curious to know how Kahano had concluded that Samont was expelled. Kahano shrugged as if he didn't have a clear answer. I didn't know that. Even though he had claimed Samont was an expelled mage, he now admitted he didn't know the reason. Yan looked at him confused, but the answer came from another source. He smelled horrible. A coarse, old voice came from inside Kahano's coat. It was a frog blinking impatiently, as if it felt uncomfortable after being hidden. There were many forbidden energies clustered around him. The stench was so strong it made me dizzy. The small frog, which wore a pointed hat, climbed onto Kahano's shoulder. When he was still human, he had been named Andrew. Now he scratched his head with a hind leg, clearly disgusted. It must be black magic, the kind spreading among mages lately. If his powers are that rotten, he was surely expelled a long time ago. Yan had never heard of black magic, but the term gave him chills. The word black alone was enough to convey something sinister. What's going on in this town? I hope I haven't gotten into something dangerous. At first, the journey's goal had only been to atone for a mistake. But now they were in a town where witches appeared and suspicious mages roamed. As he walked through the town, Kahano looked at the darkening sky of Konsugra and clicked his tongue softly. Night had fallen completely, and the hill where the windmill stood was shrouded in shadows. In the newest windmill, a faint light filtered through the window while more than a dozen mages worked hurriedly. It seems Baron Turek made a mistake in selecting the staff. In the highest level of the windmill, in the room just below the blades, Samont reflected on what had happened while frowning. The insolent attitude of that young man called Kahano still bothered him. Or maybe the Frossen family sent him here by force. The situation was frustrating. An unknown woman was constantly interfering, delaying the experiment. They had requested a competent knight to capture her, but instead an irresponsible brat from the Frossen family had arrived. This is a headache. There's still so much work to do. Pressing his temples with his fingers, Samont let out a small groan. He had received support from the Dragulia family to restore his fallen family and complete his experiment. But the moment to show results was approaching, and anxiety was starting to weigh on him. Come on, cry already, you cursed creature. His only hope left was the small snake in the jar he was holding. Inside the jar Samont held, a tiny snake hissed incessantly, showing its small, sharp fangs. A snake so small it wouldn't even fit in the palm of an adult's hand. The snake kept hissing as if telling Samont to release it while staring at him. The young snake, which had not yet grown and had sharp teeth, was entirely white like the moon rising in the night sky. 254, Extra 16 The Suspicious Town, Part 2. Under the glow of the white moonlight at the point where the green meadow ended, a shadow emerged silently from the forest. Beyond the pastures, the dense foliage turned into a thick grove. Even under the moonlight, the darkness surrounding the shadow did not dissipate. It was as if the surrounding trees were deliberately concealing it, leaving no gaps. The only part that shone was a pair of fierce eyes like those of a predator. Damn humans! The voice that came out softly carried a rage that could not be hidden, like water in a kettle that had begun to boil. The anger in that voice was directed toward the windmill that the humans had built below. I will definitely save you. With those words, an unknown figure faded back into the shadows. That presence watched the town from the darkness created by the trees in the forest. The moon, which had finally revealed that figure, illuminated its bright platinum blonde hair. Kahano, who had entered the windmill, opened his eyes in astonishment. Unlike the gloomy atmosphere outside, the inside of Samont's workshop was perfectly organized, which surprised him. Crackle, crackle. Furthermore, a lightning bolt suddenly appeared inside an empty glass tube. It was impossible not to open his eyes wide at such a phenomenon. On the top floor of the windmill, where Samont was, the lightning that appeared out of nowhere made Kahano flinch without realizing it. Is that also magic? Samont's workshop was filled with strangely shaped gears and pipes tangled like spiderwebs. As he wandered around, Kahano noticed several glass tubes similar to the one that had produced the lightning. I don't know what kind of experiment they're conducting, but it's quite noisy. They were apparently empty glass tubes. However, in some, cold dew accumulated, while in others, red flames burned. It was a sight that could only be explained by magic. Have you completed your investigation, Sir Kahano? A young voice spoke from behind Kahano. It was Samont's apprentice, who had come out to attend to him while his master remained busy with his experiments. Investigation? Yes, I think I've seen everything there is to see. Kahano discreetly touched the inner pocket of his coat. He felt a small vibration in response. That vibration seemed to tell him that everything was ready. Kahano smiled as he looked at Samont's apprentice. It's really fascinating. There's nothing inside, yet things appear. Ha ha, naturally it seems fascinating if you're seeing it for the first time. Unlike Samont, who had a stern expression, the young apprentice had a friendly smile. However, Kahano could clearly see the mockery hidden in that smile. Perhaps what you're seeing now is the process of creating something from nothing. What? In the windmill, the mages continued moving busily with their tasks. But between Kahano and the young mage, there was only an awkward tension. In fact, our experiments are related to that, making the useless useful. After saying that, Samont's apprentice playfully waved his palm, as if explaining further would be a headache. Anyway, it's an experiment closely supervised by the Dragulia family, but there's something that's been hindering it. With those words, Samont's apprentice nodded, as if encouraging Kahano to look in that direction. Following that gesture, Kahano approached the window and observed the landscape. From there, the town, its pastures, and the forest beyond were clearly visible. Lately, our barriers have been damaged. At first, we thought it was wild animals, but upon investigating, we discovered there was human interference. The apprentice took a small stone out of his pocket. Although it looked like an ordinary rock, its surface was covered in intricate magical symbols. It definitely seems to have been broken with a sword. That's right, someone is trying to interfere with us. The reason Kahano had come was to capture the witch that was supposedly appearing in the area. In the broken stone the apprentice showed him had marks suggesting dark magic. Breaking a barrier stone means that person knows how to handle the supernatural. Brutally slaughtered animals, sabotaged dragon experiments, and now evidence of forbidden magic. Perhaps it really was a witch just as they said. Please, we leave this to you, Sir Kahano. Yes, I'll do my best. Who knows, maybe if you solve this problem, the Dragulia's anger toward you will dissipate. Although he didn't care about the town's fate, capturing the witch was his job. However, those last words made Kahano tense for a moment. Oh my, I think I've gone too far, forgive me. Although he apologized, his tone was insolent and seemed to enjoy it. It was evident that his words weren't a slip, but a small revenge for Kahano's attitude towards Samont the day before. Anyway, we trust that a member of the Frossen family like you will help us successfully. The apprentice smiled as he looked at Kahano, the infamous bastard of the Frossen family, known for earning the dragon's disapproval. Of course, I'll do my best. However, Kahano also smiled in response despite the mockery. In a world of perfection, the only thing he could do was return the smiles. Yet he couldn't help but let a bitter expression slip onto his face. Sir Kahano, you should get up now, the sun is setting. It was a hill in the town where the sun was slowly sinking. From a distance, it looked like a scene worthy of a painting, but at that moment only Yan's voice echoed as he tried to wake Kahano. I told you to wake me up at sunset. Don't you see it's sunset now? The sun will set completely soon. At Yan's words, Kahano began to look around as if just realizing it. Indeed, the green grass of the meadow was tinged with the reddish waves of the sunset. Where are the sheep? The sheep. They were here a while ago. Maybe he was still a bit drowsy as Kahano suddenly asked about the sheep. However, his eyes were scanning the surroundings with an unusual seriousness. There they are. So they moved from here to there. Saying this, Kahano took a piece of paper from his pocket and began marking something on it. It was a small map that seemed to represent the town's surroundings. But now that map had unknown marks that Kahano had made previously. What is that, Sir Kahano? The path the shepherds follow. Why are you marking that? To figure something out. I want to know which pasture the sheep are taken to today. Yan watched Kahano with curiosity as he meticulously made his marks. It was strange to see something so detailed, considering how careless Kahano usually seemed. Typically, shepherds rotate the pastures so they don't get depleted, otherwise the grass withers quickly. I didn't say anything. I'm telling you before you ask. Looking at Yan, whose eyes trembled as if wondering why he was doing this, Kahano scratched his head as if it hurt. Anyway, if the shepherds rotate the pastures, there will be one where they take a break. The shepherd's job was to care for the sheep, but they also served as the town's watchmen. If there were intruders or monsters nearby, the shepherds would be the first to notice. And today, that place is empty. Therefore, the unknown intruder lurking in the forest would try to avoid the shepherd's watchful eyes. So by studying the flock's movements, Kahano deduced that tonight would be the ideal time for the being called the witch to move. It's toward the windmill, right? The one we went to before. Yes, the only pasture without shepherds or sheep that could raise the alarm. Thus, Kahano's finger pointed to the most direct path to Samont's windmill. That's why I asked you to wake me up at sunset. It seems we won't sleep well tonight. Kahano finished speaking and clicked his tongue as if still sleepy. Yan, however, couldn't find words to reply as he watched Kahano yawn calmly. Do you want dinner? I brought a lunchbox from the inn. Oh, that sounds good. Get it out quickly. A scoundrel of the Frossen family, always flirting with women and getting beaten by his older brother. Although everyone considered him a lost cause, Yan felt there was something more to Kahano that no one else saw. What's this? Lemon? Yes. Why did you bring this? You don't eat lemon like this. It's for squeezing over the meat. In my village, everyone eats it that way. The night was falling deeply. There would be no moon that night, yet as they waited, Yan's heart pounded heavily. Because more than the mysterious witch, he was intrigued to see an unknown side of Kahano. In the darkness where the moon did not shine, a shadow moved stealthily. From the distant forest to the wide meadow, the shadow ran with a speed that could be described as shot out. It did not make even the slightest sound. It had been worth watching carefully from the forest. In the direction it was moving, there were no sharp-eyed shepherds or alert sheep. Only the sinister windmill that the humans had built was visible. The shadow's golden eyes shone fiercely. Grrrr, but a faint cry in the wind made the shadow stop. It hurts, it hurts. Stop, wee. It was the cry of little spirits born from the world tree. Little ones who had once left with smiles, but now their cries were too painful to ignore. Damn humans! The cries were more vivid than ever. They were close enough to hear those heartbreaking screams. The shadow began to feel anxious due to the spirit's pleas. I have to hurry, so with more hurried steps the unknown entity lunged forward. Now its movements were no longer careful but desperate. Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Frogs, that's why it didn't realize that the meadow had turned into a mist-covered pond. By the build, it seems like a woman. Swish, a blade appeared suddenly and the shadow retreated urgently. But it was no longer a meadow but a damp mire. The muddy ground trapped its feet. Who are you? It had managed to dodge the attack just barely, but it was a lethal blow. If it hadn't heard that voice, its neck would have been cut. If I tell you who I am, will you tell me your name too? Beyond the mist it was staring into, a man emerged, tall and with reddish-brown hair. However, what stood out most was his relaxed, smiling expression. My name is Kahano. Kahano Frossen, one of his teachers had once told him, controlling the battlefield is the fastest path to victory, and now they were in the pond that the old toad had created for Kahano. Now that I've said my name, tell me yours. His stance, crouched and ready to strike, was like a sharp sword, as if he were ready to cut her down in one blow. Tell me your name before my sword touches your neck. The bastard of the Frossen family. Kahano Frossen, however, once the name used to refer to him in the past was the prodigious genius of the Frossen family, Kahano Frossen, 255 extra 17 Kahano for the young possibilities. Part 1. It was a deep night in which everyone in the village slept. In the quiet Kinsugra, where only the sounds of insects could be heard, a soft sob echoed. I'm sorry. A ray of moonlight filtered through the coarse wooden planks. The priestess of the world tree was locked in some storage shed, as there wasn't even a proper prison in the village. Sitting with her knees together and her head bowed, the gentle blue moonlight enveloped her as if trying to console her. I tried to save them truly. She had traveled a long way from the elven forest Ulfheim to reach Kinsugra. However, now she was trapped in a cage built by the mages. Tomorrow, Sarnis would arrive and she would be taken to the capital, but she wasn't crying because of the uncertain future that awaited her. It hurts so much, please stop already, I'm sorry, please get me out of here. What truly tormented her were the cries of the young spirits that still echoed in her ears. From Samont's mill, which still gleamed with lights, the heart-wrenching screams of the little spirits could be heard without end. Why do you abandon those children, mother? Those fragile and pitiful sounds made her doubt the message of the world tree which had sent her here alone. But unable to do anything, the priestess could only hide her tear-soaked face between her knees. Her shoulders trembled helplessly. The young spirits suffered and cried out because of the mage's cruel experiments. However, there was no one there to hear those sobs. Except for one person, it was a night when only the wounded remained awake. That's why the knight who was alone in his room at the inn touched his left eye silently while glaring furiously at Samont's mill. Although normally in Kinsugra only the bleating of sheep could be heard today, for some reason it felt more bustling. The children wore clean clothes and the adults were sweeping with brooms here and there. Today, someone very important from the Dragulia family is coming. They say it's a dragon. And one of pure blood, no less. They say he has golden hair and blue eyes. I can't believe I'll see a dragon before I die. The villagers were excited about the news that a dragon would arrive in Kinsugra. Born in perfection, as beautiful as jewels, just seeing a dragon was an honor and everyone was hurriedly preparing to welcome him. They're coming, they've already reached the entrance to the village. Form a line. Make sure the children don't run ahead. With the firm shout of the mayor, the villagers quickly stepped aside from the path. Although they seemed nervous about seeing a dragon for the first time, they couldn't hide the excitement coursing through their bodies. Soon, a luxurious golden carriage approached from the distance. That immutable gold was a color reserved solely for dragons born in perfection. Upon recognizing that color, the villagers began bowing their heads one by one. Welcome, Sarnis Dragulia. The carriage passed through the crowd and came to a stop. Samont, the mage, hurriedly approached with an extremely respectful posture, very different from his usual demeanor in the village. It is an honor to have you in this humble place. Finally, a noble dragon began to step out through the open door. His golden hair shone under the sunlight, and his blue eyes observed everything coldly. However, what was most imposing about his presence was the perfection he had borne since birth. Well done, Samont, you finally found a useful energy source, haven't you? Why yes, Sarnis. Everyone present bowed their heads before him. Therefore, Sarnis's eyes, which could freely look down on others, began to slowly scan the surroundings. Good thing I didn't arrive too late. The reason a noble dragon had come to this remote village was to oversee Samont's experiment. But beyond that, Sarnis wanted to see something in particular, Kahano Frossen, the young possibility they had crushed in the past. But I don't see him. What? He looked around, but he didn't see the brown hair he was searching for. The youngest son of the Frossen family, who had shown such a brilliant potential that he had surprised even the dragons. A spark of potential that needed to be verified. However, Kahano was not where he was supposed to be. Kuang, in Samont's mill, which had been left empty to receive the noble dragon, someone was carefully climbing up. Why did they build this so high? The mill that Kahano was scaling was the tallest and largest in Kinsugra. Therefore, it was difficult for anyone to climb. However, for some reason, Kahano ascended with ease without even using a rope. Will I really get my normal hands back after this? I'm telling you, yes. Do you think they've been fooling me my whole life? Andrew, on his shoulder, kicked his hind legs as if trying to dispel any doubts. Even so, it was hard not to feel uneasy. If a swordsman's hands turned into those of a frog, anyone would react like Kahano. Why are you climbing up the wall instead of using the normal entrance? Are you crazy? I want to see Samont's workshop. And why? I told you before, it wasn't a very dignified image to see Kahano climbing like a frog. Yan, who was below, watched him with concern. But the knight had already passed the mill blades and was near the window of Samont's workshop. I've been hearing children crying all night. Even though he knew no one was there, Kahano spoke in an urgent whisper. This mill seemed suspicious to me from the start. Kahano peeked into the workshop through the window and then turned his head to look back. There were the mill blades. Look, they don't even have a weather vane installed. The rusty blades didn't have the vane that any mill should have to catch the wind. The main function of a mill was to turn with the wind, but this one didn't even have that intention. Craac, that's why I need to see it up close. Gently tapping the window with his elbow to avoid making noise, Kahano carefully removed the cracked glass. It was a technique he had learned for secret meetings with ladies, but it proved useful in other situations. Kahano unlatched the window and slipped silently into Samont's workshop. Although Andrew had said there were no other security measures, it never hurt to be cautious. What a messy place. Are all mages like this? I wasn't, you brat. You have papers scattered everywhere. Mages are a disaster. This workshop was not accessible during official visits. That's why the workshop Kahano was seeing for the first time was messy, with papers strewn across the floor. What's this? A blueprint. Among the papers filled with difficult-to-read letters, there was one that caught Kahano's attention. A sheet with a simple drawing instead of complicated letters and formulas. It was a sectional blueprint of the mill they were currently in. Why does it have so many gears? Upon examining the blueprint, he saw an excessive number of gears and pipes in Samont's mill. He didn't know what they were for, but it was evident they weren't typical components of a regular mill. Kahano, what is it? I'm busy. While Kahano quickly lost interest in the blueprint and looked around, Andrew on his shoulder blinked in surprise. This, where we are now, doesn't seem to be just a mill. That's what I'm saying. I told you this was suspicious. Andrew's voice trembled with nervousness, but Kahano was focused on finding the source of the children's cries he had heard last night. As he looked around, he saw something shining. I'm telling you, this isn't an ordinary windmill. This. SHHH, be quiet for a moment. Looking up, he saw that there were glass tubes hanging from the ceiling of the workshop. They seemed to be firmly attached as if they were part of some machinery. Kahano felt the pain in his injured left eye intensify when he saw them. Can't you hear it? Hear what? It sounds like crying. Kahano really didn't care what the mage Samont was doing. After all, the experiment was supervised by Dragulia, and it wasn't something he could interfere with. Is it coming from above? But if children were involved, the situation was different. Especially if the children were suffering so much they cried all night. KNGH, the higher he climbed, the more his wounded left eye hurt. The bandage he wore was stained with blood, but his determination did not waver. Kahano, your wound is bleeding. I know. The closer he got to the empty glass tubes, the clearer the children's cries became. Finally, he reached the top of the workshop. There was a large gear and many glass tubes embedded around it. Where are they? Kahano looked around urgently, blood dripping from his eye. However, he only saw empty glass tubes. There was no sign of the crying children. There's nothing, we should go down. But, idiot, I just told you. This isn't an ordinary windmill. Andrew urged Kahano to go down, but he turned his head when he heard something. It wasn't a sound heard with his ears, but something perceived with his sight. Looking in that direction with his injured left eye, he saw a white figure. Stop torturing them. A white spark crackled inside a large glass tube at the center of the gear. It was a much larger tube than the others, and it was vibrating. As he approached, Kahano opened his eyes in shock. Leave my friends alone, you damned humans. He couldn't see it with his right eye, but he could with his injured left eye. In a place where the colors were all dark, like a scene from an oil painting, a young and severely injured snake was screaming at Kahano. A boy cried in an empty dueling arena where everyone had left. The tears the boy was shedding now were not from resentment or anger. Father. These were tears that flowed from helpless fear. The dragons of Dragulia had raged when they saw the world he had created. That was because those blue eyes desperately sought the boy's world, recognizing Kahano's potential forged by sacrificing his own young dragon. Did I do something wrong? However, no one made eye contact with Kahano, who was now crying. Neither his father, whom he respected, nor his mother, whom he loved, had the time to look at young Kahano because they were busy appeasing the angry dragons. Don't look away anymore, Kahano. A world of children that no one could protect. Therefore, the cries of the little one he had ignored continued to echo within Kahano. If you keep doing this, the star inside you will die. Perhaps the cries Kahano heard last night weren't from the young spirits in front of him, but from the child he had been ignoring until now. That's why Kahano decided not to look away and took a step toward the glass tube before him. 256, Extra 18 Kahano for the Young Possibilities, Part 2. Clang, clang, a sound echoed through the dark interior of the mill. It started from the top and spread downward. Even the spirits who lay weakened lifted their heads at the sudden noise. Crackle, the sword slashed with such force that it even crackled with flames. However, Samont's glass tubes didn't show a single scratch. Kahano realized it. It's magic. The tubes trapping the little spirits were transparent, but they were filled with the mystery Samont had embedded in them. That power deceived the world and deflected the tip of his sword. Andrew, is there no way to break this? Not right now, maybe if you give me some time. Time is the last thing we have. Andrew had been a great wizard, but that was when he had a human form. Asking him for a solution now was useless. Damn it. Kahano swallowed, his throat burning with urgency. He felt cornered, but while his hands remained still, his eyes continued to move sharply. Couldn't they have enchanted all these things with magic? Above the little snake, who was staring wide-eyed, there were numerous mechanical devices. He didn't know what they were for, but surely one of them was keeping the spirits trapped. I remember seeing a diagram somewhere. Recalling the diagram he had seen, Kahano licked his lips. As complicated as the machinery was, disassembling it was the opposite of assembling it, or at least he might find a weak point. Rumble, Kahano had come up with a plan, but it was too late. What is this? The ground suddenly shook as if an earthquake was happening. Kahano quickly crouched down, but the tremor didn't stop. An earthquake? No. This isn't an earthquake. Clank, clank. A deafening noise came from below. Kahano looked down and saw it. The gears of the mill began to move. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of gears turned like a spreading wave, locking into each other and roaring in unison. Kahano felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Stop it already. At the same time, he heard the screams of the spirits behind him. Trapped in the glass capsules, they glowed like burning candles and screamed in pain. This isn't a mill, rumble. With a roar like thunder, Samont's mill was rising. It was the mill a fallen mage had built to fulfill the wish of a perfect dragon. This is a golem. It was finally showing its true form, a masterpiece of magic and engineering. Perhaps the largest golem in the world was rising, devouring the cries of the little spirits. Ruar, rumble. A deafening sound rumbled through the peaceful hills of Kinsugra. That noise came from the mill, which was slowly standing up. The villagers who had been watching the event in honor of the noble dragon screamed in horror at the sight. My God, what is that? The mill is rising. It was such a terrifying sight that they even forgot about the dragon's presence. Samont's mill, with its rusted structure and sharp spear-like head aimed at the sky, was slowly standing up. The sight was so grotesque and monstrous that the villagers could only hold their breath. What do you think, Lord Sarnas? While everyone was silent, the only one who couldn't hide his excitement was the mage Samont, who raised his arms in triumph. He had been rejected by his fallen lineage and expelled from his order of wizards, but now no one there could dare to despise him because the roar of the golem above was Samont's triumphant cry. Look at that imposing figure, roar. Finally, the giant that had stood up roared in fury, as if announcing its arrival to the world. Samont laughed like a madman, his face a mask of lunacy, but the dragon's blue eyes only showed a cold smile. Excellent, Samont. The mill, disguised until that moment, was actually a giant golem born of the mage's madness. Even Sarnas, always composed, allowed a smile to slip as he admired the monstrous creation. My God, it was large enough to destroy the hill. The villagers, frozen in awe, began to awaken from their trance when they saw the golem moving closer. Thud, thud, ha, thud, thud, thud. Ha ha, each step of the golem was a crashing boom that brought it closer and closer. But as it advanced toward Kinsugra, fear replaced any reverence the villagers felt. Where is it going? It's heading toward the village. Because the golem was heading for the village, an unstoppable mass of machinery and magic. Even Samont, the golem's creator, was stunned. This can't be. He frantically turned the control levers, but the golem wouldn't respond. It kept moving forward, its massive steps closing in on the gathered humans. Panic drained the color from Samont's face. Lord Sarnas, what's happening? This. Roar, the golem picked up speed, venting steam as it advanced like an enraged beast. Now Sarnas also understood the gravity of the situation. I'll kill them all, accompanying the golem's roar, a childlike voice screamed. No one else could hear it, but it was the spirits trapped in the mill who cried out in rage. Now you'll suffer like we did. a young world that was wounded because no one stepped forward. Now those worlds were crying out to the humans, pouring out their fury with no place left to go. Ag, clang, clang. Kahano struggled against the scorching heat emanating from behind him. The hot air made him squeeze his eyes shut tightly. It was as if all that heat was coming from the trapped spirits. But what truly tormented him wasn't that heat. This is way too high, try to stay quiet for a bit. There was Kahano hanging precariously from the tip of the windmill blade, which was finally starting to turn. It had always been a tall structure, but now that it was moving, it seemed even higher. He had managed to escape the heat, but now he was trapped on the gigantic, rusted blades of the windmill. I should have turned into a sparrow instead of a frog. That really would have been adorable. Andrew kicked his legs in fear, but Kahano was no less terrified. Don't you think my head just brushed against a cloud? Being so high up, he felt the cold air and laughed nervously. It's time to get down. What goes up must come down. When the blade reached its lowest point, Kahano clenched his teeth and prepared himself. Not even when I was born did I feel this. The ridiculous sensation of floating made the area below his navel tingle as if it were going to burst. But this was not a moment when he could simply squeeze his eyes shut like he had before. Thud, 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 the golem's footsteps grew closer and closer, signaling that the ground was near. Kahano, who had already failed 3 times at landing and was feeling the dizzying slide, didn't want to taste the clouds with his tongue any longer. Hold on tight, Kahano's eyes glowed, concentrating on the precise moment. When the windmill blade passed near the golem's knee, he leaped. At the moment the rotating blade came close to the golem's knees, Kahano, aiming for that instant, jumped like a flying squirrel. There was a frog scream along with him, but Kahano's body was already flying toward the next landing point. Wah! You couldn't jump from a moving golem unless you had the courage to do it. The difficulty level was equivalent to stepping on the debris of a collapsing building. Aren't we on the ground yet? You'll see for yourself. I have my eyes closed. However, Kahano descended with precision, landing on each point he had planned. Even Yan, who was following him on his donkey, watched with his mouth agape. Last jump. Perfectly understanding the golem's movements, Kahano executed his final maneuver. Kahano, who had flown by following the motion, was now attempting the final leap toward the meadow. Ribbit. Although the landing wasn't perfect, at least he was back on solid ground. Sir Kahano. Are you all right? Kahano's expression was so twisted that it was hard to ask him what had happened. His brown hair was mercilessly tousled by the strong wind, which did not help his appearance. However, confirming that his feet had finally touched the ground, Kahano tried to steady his trembling legs and pointed at Yan. Take a potion out of your backpack, it's the one glowing green. This one? Yes, that one. The glass bottle Yan pulled out glowed with an ominous green light. However, Kahano didn't hesitate to open it and pour the contents into his mouth. Cough, cough. The thick, concentrated taste of pine needles tortured his tongue. The smell was so strong that even Andrew, who was lying face down as if dead, opened his eyes. Where is it going now? Kahano, who had regained his senses thanks to the potion, saw the golem heading toward Konsugra. The cries of the spirits trapped inside the golem, running as if ready to destroy the village, still echoed. It looks like the giant is furious about something, also its eyes look red. They're probably not eyes but windows. Understanding what was happening from the cries of the spirits, Kahano quickly called to Andrew. Wake up already? Where am I? Quick, come to your senses and get ready as I told you. Kahano shook Andrew hard to wake him up. Then he adjusted his sword and began looking down the slope leading to the village. The hills of Konsugra were marked with enormous footprints. Before, the place had been full of green grass, but where the golem had passed, only dark earth remained. Sir Kahano, don't tell me you're going to face the golem again. Yan's eyes widened in disbelief at the sight of Kahano preparing his gear. However, Kahano's gaze was firm and determined, as if he had already made up his mind. But someone has to do something. What? Yan couldn't hear the spirit's cries, but Kahano's ears were still filled with those laments. The child who had been hiding inside Kahano began to awaken with that sound. The world of the spirits, connected through his wounds, was no different from his own world now. Someone has to step up for them. Remembering the time when no one had, Kahano decided that this time he would. Take this. Kahano. Sir Kahano. Kahano handed Yan a bundle of white papers and ran toward the massive golem windmill. Yan's anxious voice was left behind, but Kahano was already charging toward the village. What is this? Now alone on the hill, Yan looked at the papers Kahano had given him. They were the blueprints showing how Samont's windmill was constructed, filled with various diagrams. Yan focused on a note written in red letters at the bottom. Emergency braking device. Samont's golem continued advancing toward the village. Kahano ran down the hill to stop it. His sword was small and the enemy gigantic, but what now shone in Kahano's left eye was the world he had forgotten. The child crying within him slowly raised his head, guided by the starlight filtering through his connected world. Biography of Kahano, thud, 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 each footstep made the earth tremble as if the very ground was about to crack. The vibrations could be felt even from a distance, but as the golem approached, fear reflected on the faces of the villagers. It's headed for the village. There are children in the village. Consugra, a quiet place on a remote corner of the barony of Turek, had never faced a crisis like this. The people, finally aware of the danger, ran toward the village. However, their movements were far too slow compared to the strides of the golem. Lord Sarnas, help us. Stop the golem. That giant is heading straight for the village. The only being they could trust was a dragon born of perfection. Without hesitation, the villagers fell to their knees and desperately pleaded with Sarnas. Yet the cold blue eyes of the dragon didn't turn toward the people begging him. Is it impossible to control it? No, technically not, be honest. Samont tried to stammer an excuse, but for some reason he couldn't open his mouth easily in front of Sarnas. The world of Sarnas grew larger the longer you looked at him. As a rightful ruler, his gaze emitted a force impossible to defy. I'm sorry. The last chance vanished in a powerless failure. Samont, consumed by despair, bowed his head. However, a subtle smile appeared on Sarnas's face. This is even better. What? The gigantic golem advanced toward Consugra. The destruction was no accident, it was the purpose of Sarnas's experiment. What mattered wasn't controlling the golem, but how much it could crush. Wasn't this golem created to face the southern beast tribes? Testing it here wouldn't be so bad. The golem, born for destruction, had absorbed the cries of the young spirits. Sarnas did not hear the villagers' laments or the spirits' screams, he only saw the target in front of him. But there was one person who could reach into Sarnas's world. Hold on just a little longer, a man whose potential was so brilliant that even dragons feared it. Kahano ran downhill, charging straight toward the golem. I'll stop it immediately, Kahano. Frossen, a man who hadn't been there when he was needed. Kahano Frossen. But as he ran toward where he should be, he shone like that boy of the past. Thud, 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 the vibrations traveling through the air seemed to shake his insides. But Kahano, sliding down the hill, didn't have a second to hesitate. If it keeps going, it'll reach the village. He didn't need to hear the spirit's screams to know. Samont's mill was heading straight for the village. He didn't even need to imagine what would happen if the enraged golem reached the village. I can't let that happen. Kahano drew his sword and ran toward the golem's feet. The distance was so dangerous that it seemed he could be crushed at any moment, but his shining eyes calmly focused on the golem's descending feet. Thud, 1, thud, 2. There was a time when he believed he could achieve any goal, no matter how impossible it seemed. In those days, he feared no opponent. Thud, 3. But now reality had caught up to him. He was just Kahano, a pathetic version of his childhood self who had dreamed of being great. To redeem himself, Kahano leaped toward the golem's foot. Crash, the dust that splashed his face was rough and the violently blowing wind was cutting. Conditions impossible to endure for an ordinary person. But Kahano didn't let go, climbing up with the golem's foot. The eyes of the child watching from his inner world drew closer and closer to the sky. Emergency brake. Samont's emergency brake had 3 parts. The first on the left knee, the second at the center of the waist, and the third at the axle of the still furiously spinning blades. First, the knee. When the golem's foot reached its highest point, Kahano climbed up quickly. It was just a fleeting moment when the foot briefly paused before taking the next step, but that brief instant was all he needed to move freely. Grrr, he regretted his past self. He'd had time, but he froze. But now the time left to him offered a last chance he didn't intend to waste. Kahano jumped from the left foot of the golem, which was quickly descending, a risky jump with no support. It seemed insane, but his decision was correct. In front of him, the golem's knee descended. Crash, metal fragments grazed his cheek, but Kahano smiled despite the blood running down his face. He had found what he was looking for. I found it, a small, barely visible red mark. Clinging to the golem's knee, he saw the emergency brake marked in red. Why don't we stop and have a little chat? His sword gleamed with a light so intense that even Sarnas from afar could see it. Crash, a small gear hidden in the dark interior. The piece that controlled the knee's movement shattered into pieces with Kahano's sword. Roar, rumble. A corner of the hill collapsed due to the sudden lurch of the golem. The heavy structure couldn't support its own weight, leaving heaps of dark earth in its wake. The villagers, watching from a nearby hill, covered their mouths in astonishment. Some noticed a bright light on the golem. What's that? Even through the dust, an unusual light shone. That light climbed quickly from the golem's knee to its waist. Now stop, it's a person. How can there be a person there? Roar. The golem, whose left leg wouldn't move at all, was caught by the ankle and roared loudly. But everyone's eyes fixed on Kahano, who kept striking with his sword. It's Kahano, Sir Kahano, Kahano of Frossen. He's the guest from our inn. Destruction continued approaching the village, but the guards didn't move and Sarnas's eyes remained cold. People who were in the right place but didn't do what they should. Yet even in that moment of despair, there remained a knight willing to do what was necessary for them. Sir Kahano is destroying the golem. Oh heavens, an enemy far too big for a mere human. Stopping the golem was an impossible dream, but in front of the villagers, a man was making it reality. This is the second one. Sweat ran down his chin and dripped onto the red mark. He was exhausted and his sword trembled. But his eyes remained fixed on his goal. Crash, roar, the second break at the waist broke. The lower half of the golem froze completely. Sir Kahano is destroying the mill, Kahano of Frossen. The pride of the town of La Mancha stands before us. The cries of joy resounded around him. It was the respect and admiration deserved by a knight who protected a world that couldn't defend itself. But behind those cheers, the eyes of a dragon remained cold. It's done, Lord Sarnas. The villagers were thanking the knight instead of the dragon. Sarnas's heart burned with rage, but Samont didn't notice. I don't know what happened, but Kahano disabled the brake. The legs are useless, but the arms still work. Can it still move? The world of Kahano, seen through Sarnas's closed left eye, was like a wounded flower. But even a wounded flower can reach the stars if it keeps dreaming. In that case, let's test it now. Sarnas smiled as he made a slicing gesture. At the same time, Sarnas's fingers traced a line across the back of his neck. How about it? If I can, I promise to offer you my full support in the future. But only perfect dragons can reach the sky above. Sarnas whispered softly as he watched how the trampled possibilities regained their color. Kill him? Ha ha! Kahano was climbing the mill, dragging his already exhausted body. Even though the golem was now still and only emitted wails toward the village, Kahano still had a task to complete. It hurts. It hurts so much. Please, someone get us out of here. Hold on a little longer. The cries kept coming from the top of the mill. Though the people behind him were celebrating, they couldn't hear the wails of the young spirits. Only Kahano could perceive those cries as he climbed toward the final emergency brake. Kahano! Suddenly, a sound rumbled like thunder in his mind. It was a warning from the mage connected through their bond. Look up, perhaps because he was so exhausted he hadn't noticed the lethal presence in time. A sharp threat bared its fangs above his head. What the hell is that now? The golem's right arm, as tall as a mountain, was descending upon him. It looked like a meteor falling from the sky, but Kahano noticed too late there was no way to escape. Jump! Suddenly, a strange sensation coursed through his legs. It was the mage's power transmitted through their connection. Jump like a frog! The contact with Andrew had expanded Kahano's world, thus his body adopted the agility of Andrew's legs. Crash! A devastating blow struck with no concern for whether his body would shatter. As debris flew everywhere, Samont raised his hand to control the golem, but a silhouette emerged even higher. I told you to be a sparrow, not a frog. Hop! The jumping power of a frog can reach up to 20 times its size. Therefore, Kahano soared into the sky, so high that he could look over the mill. And how am I going to get down now? For a moment, Kahano ascended to the highest point in the world. Seeing the sky he had dreamed of as a child, the small boy inside him smiled brightly. Good positioning. Seeing Kahano in the air, Andrew began to chant a spell quickly. Good positioning. At this rate, Kahano is going to die. From within the old brass basin, Andrew closed his eyes. Yan called to him desperately, but Andrew's magical gesture had already transcended the skies. Clouds of Mambrino, I summon you now. The clouds of Mambrino, more powerful than any other force Andrew could invoke. It was an impossible spell without the enchanted golden helmet, but with its aid, he could achieve it for a brief moment. The nobility of ideals deserves a blue sky. Rumble, blue clouds gathered above the sky where Kahano was ascending. Impossible dreams deserve white lightning. Crack, white lightning began to form. The sudden storm painted the hills of Consugra white. Let the colors I summoned deceive the world. Even though his current form was that of a humble frog, nevertheless, the name he was given when he was human was the great mage of Mambrino. Andrew, the summoner of lightning. Aha! A heavy rain began to fall over the hill where the spirits wept. Amid the flashes of white lightning, Kahano descended with a celestial light. This is the final blow. A white bolt fell for the young spirits who had called to him. The white lightning that the boy had embraced descended with Kahano, burning his left eye and striking the Samont mill. Boom! A flower was blooming. His faith in himself had carried him to the stars. The hill of Consugra shone with a brilliance so intense that even the dragon could not ignore it, and the blades of the mill shattered. To dream the impossible. To defeat invincible enemies, to endure unbearable pain, to die for noble ideals. To right wrongs, to love with purity and kindness. To fall in love with impossible dreams, and thus with faith reach for the stars. That is the mission and duty of a true knight. From the novel Don Quixote, 257 extra 19 Kahano for another encounter. End. A tower stood proudly as if trying to pierce the sky. And towards that tower a bolt of lightning descended with fury. Huaya, crack boom, with a deafening roar the top of the windmill began to explode. Seen from a distance, it looked like a rain of fireworks scattering into countless fragments. The villagers, upon seeing the countless luminous particles coloring the hill, began to cover their mouths in astonishment. One device remains. However, the lightning that had started in the sky had not yet lost its brilliance. Kahano's left eye, wide open, still glowed with a white light. The knight Kahano, who had drawn his sword for the young spirit still suffering, descended down the golem's shoulder with the lightning he had borrowed from the sky. Ruwar. The lightning, which had started from the head, traveled down the shoulder and reached the blades. Samont, realizing where that current was headed, quickly manipulated his controller, but Kahano's sharp perception had already anticipated the golem's movements. Kahano, strike again. Andrew issued another warning upon seeing the golem's fist descending from above. However, upon what happened next, even he could only watch with his mouth agape. What is that? The golem's arm was rising towards the sky, as if someone were pulling it with tremendous force. Everyone present raised their heads to witness such an absurd scene. Grrr, beneath the golem's arm, which was slowly lifting, Kahano remained clinging to his sword, gritting his teeth. Crack, crack, boom, a sensation as if an entire mountain were being shifted. Kahano's sword, clashing against the golem's fist, sparked and emitted a metallic screech, but his wrist did not stop moving, twisting the golem's strength. Huaya, a defensive dueling technique, deflecting the opponent's strike with a circular motion. A technique difficult to execute even in combat between humans was now being performed against Samont's windmill. Kahano, frozen so in the end. Kahano's body, burning with white light, looked like a star. Sarnis, understanding the meaning of this sight, began to tremble visibly as if struck by a storm. Just a little more, crack, crackle, a sound of breaking so loud it was heard even from the hill. The sound came from the golem's shoulder joint, which had exceeded its limit. Unable to withstand its own force, the golem's arm twisted grotesquely, and the windmill let out a cry of agony. Ruwar. Beyond the arm of the golem, which Kahano had repelled, something became visible, the windmill blades still squeezing the young spirits. Now I see it. A picture he had once imagined, wondering if he could ever make it real. However, what he saw now matched that picture exactly. A beam of light emanated from Kahano as he discovered that final moment. It was a light similar to that of a star borrowed from the sky by a child. With that light reflected in his left eye, Kahano aimed at the axis of the blades. Huaya. For the children who cried because no one had stepped forward, a starlight thrown for them illuminated the hill of Consugra as it rushed toward the golem's chest. Crash, with the sound of something shattering, Samont's windmill began to harden like a stone statue, with its left arm still extended towards the sky. From that immobile arm, lights of many colors began to flow. I did it, Kahano smiled with satisfaction as he gazed at that light. A star that had fulfilled its duty and was now falling, while many others began to rise towards the sky. At the point where they intersected, there was a glow never seen before. Is that an aurora? From the top of a hill covered in rubble, Kahano smiled weakly. Although his body lay exhausted, he could afford to smile thanks to the rippling waves of light shining above his head. With a view like this, it wasn't a bad gamble. The young spirits, freed from human hands, fluttered happily, painting the sky with their own colors. It was a scene that looked like an immense silk mantle covering the heavens. Upon witnessing this sky visible only because he had decided not to look away, Kahano slightly raised his hand and waved softly. Goodbye. A fire-breathing lizard, a shining butterfly, a tiny squid the size of a fingernail, and a small white snake that stared at him with its tiny eyes. Although many of these small beings still hovered around him, Kahano, already exhausted, could no longer understand their words. Yes, I know, see you later, so he could only bid farewell with a promise for another time. He didn't know when it would be, but if fate allowed it, they would meet again. As if understanding his words, the young spirits surrendered one by one to the aurora dancing in the sky. It's beautiful to see it this way. Smiling as he watched them depart, Kahano admired the sky he could now see because he had not turned away. At last, the sky he gazed upon was filled with stars twinkling endlessly towards him. At some point in the summer, in a small, nameless village, not far from Consugra, the local tavern buzzed with lively chatter due to the circulating rumors. They say he brought down a giant golem. A golem controlled by an evil mage. And it wasn't a dragon, but a human knight. What was his name again? I think it was Kahano of La Mancha. Kahano of La Mancha, the knight who defended the village of Consugra from the wicked golem. The rumors recounting that grand and spectacular scene continued to spread from town to town, from city to city, further glorifying Kahano's name. Ah, you've done something huge this time. However, Kahano himself, the protagonist of the rumor, couldn't even swallow the bread stuffed in his cheeks. With a comical expression, he tilted his head. What did I tell you before you left? I told you to lay low, to avoid drawing as much attention as possible. It was a village he had reached after leaving Consugra. There, Kahano was enjoying warm bread after a long time, but because of Perez, who sat across from him, he couldn't swallow it and only moved his eyes from side to side. And you're telling me you destroyed a golem? And not just any golem, but one funded by Dragulia. Hey, I did it because it was necessary. And on top of that, you handed the key to the cell to the imprisoned elf, gulp. In the silent table, someone swallowed nervously. It wasn't Kahano, who still had his mouth full of bread, but the young Yan sitting beside him. Unlike Kahano, who was pretending to be clueless, Yan trembled like a leaf, unable to hide his anxiety. It's strange. I'm sure I handed it over discreetly. Seeing that Kahano didn't even attempt to make an excuse, Perez's face began to harden. Bringing down an out-of-control golem could be justified, so it was a matter that could be resolved. However, releasing an elf who was under Sarnas's custody was a far more complicated issue, even for someone of the Frossen lineage. Don't go near the capital for a while, clink. With those words, Perez placed a rather heavy pouch on the table. The weight of those gold coins seemed to tell him to leave as soon as possible and stay far away for a long time. Leave as soon as you can. Word is already spreading that Dragulia is taking action. The order to leave sounded cold, but the words he added afterward revealed sincere concern for his brother. Kahano, who had now humiliated Dragulia twice, a family that pursued perfection, was beginning to shine brightly with potential. The old reputation of Frossen's parasite was no longer enough to protect him. I suppose we couldn't hide it forever. Young birds must leave the nest at some point, whether by choice or by external circumstances. Looking at his brother, who had taken so long to spread his wings, Perez stood up from his seat. Brother, if he left now, they didn't know when they would see each other again. However, Perez showed no hesitation as he exited the tavern. It was a determined and firm farewell, as if he were showing Kahano what he also needed to do. But for Kahano, who still wasn't used to goodbyes, all he could do was murmur brother as he watched Perez's back moving away. After winter came spring, and now summer was full of green leaves. The night the boy and a frog walked amidst that season and stopped for a moment when they reached a crossroads. Which way do we go now? The road split into 4 directions, east, west, south, and north. Without a clear destination, Kahano couldn't help but look thoughtful. Luckily, he knew not to head north, where the capital lay, so at least that option was ruled out. How about heading east? I know a wizard there and we might get information about my body. I'd prefer we head south. Lord Perez said we should be careful about dragons. Should he go east for Andrew, or should he follow Perez's advice and head south? Both suggestions had valid reasons, which made choosing difficult. But suddenly, Kahano turned his head upon hearing the trill of a bird coming from a completely different direction. What's that? Flying above his head, a bird seemed to demand that he make a decision quickly. It was a messenger hawk, but unlike the usual ones, it had the powerful wings of a falcon, a species only seen in the far west. A drawing, the hawk descended lightly onto his outstretched arm. In the messaging tube, which was thicker than usual for a bird of its size, there wasn't an ordinary letter but an anonymous illustration. What's this, Lord Kahano? I don't know. Kahano scratched his head as the hawk adjusted its wings. But this style feels familiar. After observing the drawing for a while, Kahano felt it was both strange and familiar at the same time. Every meticulous brushstroke seemed like the work of a true master. It was as if the landscape he was seeing had been captured alive on paper. This illustration reminded him clearly of one he had seen before. Consugra, the same scene he had seen from a dark prison, but which now seemed illuminated in his mind. Remembering the silver-haired elf who had made that drawing, Kahano finally realized who the author was. Andrew, yes, in which direction is the city of the elves? You mean Ulfheim? It's to the west. A messenger hawk had arrived when he had nowhere left to go. As he gazed at the drawing, which had come as a sign in a moment of uncertainty, Kahano turned his head to the west. Then let's head west. To the west? Why suddenly to the west? Neither east nor south, which they had been discussing until now. Andrew and Yan looked at him confused, but Kahano had already made his decision and began walking. That's good, anyway my sword is broken and I wanted to get a new one. The fight with the golem had been intense, and Kahano's sword was now chipped and worn. It could be considered an honorable scar, but for a knight, his sword was an essential companion. They say dwarves are excellent blacksmiths. I've always wanted to have a sword made by them. Beyond the elven forest of Ulfheim lay Miakheim, the home of the dwarves, and it was said that every sword forged there was a true masterpiece. By the way, Lord Kahano, this drawing is very strange, look here. While walking west, Yan studied the drawing closely and showed it to Kahano with bright eyes. At first, I thought it was a night sky, but it's not. Looking carefully, there were other hidden landscapes in the drawing. If you look here, doesn't it look like a city? Oh, you're right. It's small, but it looks like a maze of alleys surrounding this star. What looked like a night sky was actually a drawing of a dark city. In one corner, there was a small golden star emitting a faint glow. Kahano couldn't help but feel drawn to it. It's an interesting drawing. The star isn't drawn in the sky, but on the ground. Although not in the night sky, that small star seemed to declare itself a star nonetheless. Though small, it was the golden star that shone the brightest. Kahano, feeling pity for it, unconsciously traced it with his finger. What could this be? Kahano didn't know, but what he was seeing was a scene he would encounter in a distant future. Though the time wasn't right yet, Kahano began walking slowly toward that uncertain destination. Toward that star which, though not in the lofty night sky, knew how to shine on its own. For that reason, every step he took was a step toward an encounter. Epilogue of Kahano End. 258. Note from the author and translator. Author's note. Dear readers, I am Q10. With today's manuscript, star-embracing Swordmaster has reached its conclusion. I want to sincerely thank everyone who has been with me up to this point. Thinking that this is farewell to both Vlad and Kahano leaves an emptiness in my heart, but our story has come to an end and it's time to let it go. At first, I thought this work would never become a paid story. Its growth was slow, and honestly, I was on the verge of abandoning it. But today, I've successfully completed it, and I'm here writing you a message of gratitude. All of this was possible thanks to you, the readers. That's why I gave my utmost effort to deliver a worthy ending. I hope this conclusion, which is not a final farewell but rather a promise of future reunions, is the ending you wished for. There are many things I'd like to say, but I believe goodbyes are better when they are simple and sincere. Just as Kahano set off once more in search of Vlad, IQ10 will also say goodbye for now, so that we may meet again in the future. Thank you all until we meet again, farewell. Translator's note. Hello, this is Hayes. This is the first time I've finished translating a novel, so I won't leave a long message. I can only say thank you to everyone who supported my translation, despite some mistakes along the way. Throughout this time, this novel has been perfect. Finishing it makes me both happy and sad, but nothing lasts forever. I can only express my gratitude. See you around. You can enjoy other series I'm working on. Thank you and farewell.